Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Richard Beasley. Scott Davis, 48, relocated from South Carolina to Ohio after 15 years of work there. He sought a new job with higher pay to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. While searching, he came across a job posting on Craigslist that said, "We need someone to take care of a 688-acre property and feed the cattle. The position offers $1,300 per week, and you will live in a lovely two-bedroom mobile home. Older, single applicants are preferred, but we welcome all candidates. This opportunity won't last long, so please apply immediately." Scott was drawn to the benefits highlighted in the job listing. Eager to find a good job, he planned to contact the employer soon. After hearing back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the ad, Scott was quickly offered the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta, where Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffy. They appeared to be genuine farmers, which made Scott feel comfortable and trusting. To earn Scott's trust, Richard arranged a preliminary interview with him. He proposed that Scott ride with him to the job site. They drove into a remote forest area where there was no cell phone reception. Richard suddenly asked Brogan, who was driving, to stop the car, saying that he needed to pick up some equipment for the farm near where they had shot the deer last time. After that, Richard and Scott exited the vehicle. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest together. As they walked, Richard stayed behind Scott. Scott then heard a clicking sound and some mumbling from behind him. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood that he was the next target. Just as Richard was about to shoot, Scott quickly pushed the gun away, causing the bullet to hit his elbow. He then sprinted away while Richard pursued him, firing his weapon. Bullets zipped past Scott's head, and he heard trees and branches snapping behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the revolver aimed at him. He was unsure of his destination, having never been to this place before, but that didn't matter. His main goal was to escape from Richard. Suddenly, Richard shot at him, hitting Scott in the arm and knocking him to the ground. However, before Richard could take another shot, Scott quickly got back on his feet and ran. Blood flowed continuously from his injured arm. In an effort to evade the gunfire, Scott veered to the right and slipped between two large tree trunks. He descended a small, slippery slope and almost lost his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. Scott waved his arms to maintain his balance, ignoring the pain from his gunshot wound. He realized that falling could mean the end for him. As the ground leveled off and he began to run again, he heard the sound of a revolver firing again, right behind him. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away. When Scott broke through the underbrush, he paused, disoriented and unsure. Dense trees and bushes surrounded him, nothing familiar to guide him. The murderer was closing in, crashing through the brush. There was no time to hesitate, he had to keep running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard the revolver fire again. The reality of his situation filled him with dread. He sprinted but stumbled, sweat blurring his vision. His head spun, and a loud ringing filled his ears. Exhausted, he finally stopped by a small ditch, hiding behind a tree to listen for the gunman. Scott felt the fear radiating from him as he groaned softly. His arm bled heavily, but he felt no pain. As his heartbeat steadied, he heard distant dog barks and crows cawing. He strained to listen for anyone searching for him, but the forest remained eerily quiet. After a long wait, he believed he had escaped and felt relief, but it took him 7 hours to feel safe enough to seek help. He eventually found the house and called the police, who arrived 15 minutes later. Scott recounted everything about the job listing, Richard, and the chase. He survived an 8-hour pursuit, but not all victims are so fortunate. He wasn't the first to apply for that job. Hundreds had been hired before him. In August 2011, a 56-year-old man named Ralph Geiger faced hardship, unemployed and living in a camp in Aiken, Ohio. In August 2011, Ralph faced difficult circumstances after losing his job and having to move into a homeless shelter in Aiken, Ohio. He was determined to rebuild his life. After graduating from high school in the 1970s, he had moved to California to work with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and started his own successful business, where he hired workers and earned a living by renovating homes and taking on various odd jobs. Unfortunately, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he realized he could no longer afford his rent, which led him to seek shelter in a homeless facility. Ralph lost his apartment and faced difficult times, but at least he didn't have the added responsibility of supporting a wife and children, as he was a lifelong bachelor. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who he considered like a daughter, is 26 years old. They have maintained a strong bond since he hired her to clean his house many years ago. Ralph has always been willing to help his friends. In the summer of 2011, Ralph visited the library every day to search for jobs online. By the end of July, he excitedly shared with Summer that he had secured a fantastic position managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job offered him a free mobile home and a weekly salary of $300. Summer was thrilled for Ralph and felt he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph appeared content as well, expressing that this job was a great chance for him to regain his economic independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and encouraged him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without any updates from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to call him multiple times, but each time she only reached his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. Summer encountered someone else when she called Ralph's phone, which appeared to have been reassigned. Although she was concerned about Ralph, she didn't report him missing because she wasn't certain he was actually gone missing. Ralph had gone missing before but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauley, who had faced difficult years. His marriage ended 2 years earlier, leaving him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting anew in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After his divorce, David found comfort in using his computer, often exploring various topics online. One night in October 2011, he came across an intriguing ad on Craigslist. In the Help Wanted section, he found a job listing for a farm caretaker to oversee a 688-acre farm in rural Ohio. The position offered a weekly salary of $1,300 and included the use of a free trailer on the property. David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, was curious and excited about a new opportunity. He thought taking a break from the city would be a big change, and rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, seemed like the perfect choice. Plus, having a free place to stay would help him save money. He responded to an advertisement and soon heard back. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, kept in touch with him regularly. On October 22, 2011, David called her. He sounded very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He talked about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David chatted for a while. Deborah wished her brother good luck and reminded him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, neither of them realized it would be their last conversation. Back to Scott's story. After Scott escaped a dangerous situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he met Richard and Brogan. However, they encountered a problem. A fire had damaged the surveillance room the night before, making it difficult to recover the footage. The news reported on a man who posted a job ad on Craigslist. Instead of offering employment, he lured his victims into the woods and murdered them. This shocking story attracted significant media attention. Meanwhile, David's sister, who hadn't heard from him in some time, saw the news and contacted the police. They quickly determined that David was another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest for clues related to an attempted murder of another victim, Scott. After 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and soon after, they uncovered a grave that had been dug for him. A K-9 unit was called in, and shortly thereafter, the dogs alerted the officers to something unusual. They discovered another body buried in the damp soil, which turned out to be David, who had been shot in the back of the head. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave with a body that lacked any identification. The sheriff's office in Noble County reached out to the FBI for assistance in finding out who had posted the job advertisement. They needed the FBI's help to trace the poster using the IP address and the advertisement's content. They determined that the job seeker was looking for someone very specific, someone who could vanish without drawing much attention. During interviews, if the applicant mentioned being married or having combat or martial arts experience, Richard would reject them. He was only interested in older men. He did not respond to any inquiries from women who applied. The victims, Ralph Geiger, David Pauley, and Scott Davis, fit the criteria set by the suspect. Another man, Timothy Kern, a 47-year-old divorced father living with his 3 sons, also matched these criteria. When he accepted a job in Ohio, he had to leave his sons behind. Timothy responded to the advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after Scott Davis's incident. On November 12th, he visited his sons to say goodbye before heading to Ohio. After that, no one heard from him again. Once Timothy went missing, the investigation intensified. About 2 weeks later, the FBI traced the IP address of the ad poster to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. Joe claimed he didn't use Craigslist and that the ads were not his. He was unfamiliar with Richard but mentioned that a man had rented a room there. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner, which showed a local man named Richard Beasley. When Joe viewed the footage, he recognized the man, but noted he had introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. The police were unaware that they had discovered Ralph, the first victim of Richard Beasley, buried in an unmarked grave. They also identified Brogan Raffy as Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken to jail. So who was Richard Beasley and why did he become a serial killer? Richard Beasley, born in 1959, grew up in Akron, Ohio, primarily with his mother, who worked in an office. After graduation, he became a mechanic but had a criminal history, serving 5 years in a Texas prison for burglary and another 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio secretly, adopting a new identity. He created a facade of a compassionate man, pretending to be a pastor and going to church daily. However, his life took a turn when he became addicted to drugs following a car accident, and he eventually stopped working and lost his ability to earn money. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone in Richard's motorcycle group. Richard decided to guide Brogan by discussing the importance of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his preachy attitude, Richard was actually involved in shady activities. He found an apartment near the street where he sought out vulnerable people, such as homeless people and drug addicts, to do shady things. The police eventually caught on to his schemes, forcing Richard to create a new false identity. He then shifted his focus to targeting homeless and unemployed individuals to steal their money and identities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Brogan agreed to testify against Richard and reveal everything he had done. Brogan reported that he witnessed Richard lead Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, which was the same location where Richard later lured David and Scott. In his report, Brogan described the incident, stating that on a hot summer night, they took Ralph into the forest. He mentioned that he walked ahead while Richard and the others returned to the car and that he didn't join them. He recalled that suddenly, there was a loud noise, prompting him to go back to the car to grab a shovel. When he returned, he noted that Ralph was still there and that Richard had put Ralph's clothes and personal belongings into a garbage bag. Richard dug a hole that was about waist deep and roughly 4 feet wide and that they had difficulty placing Ralph's body in it. Finally, he added that they sprinkled lime over him as a sort of ritual. After Richard took on Ralph's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He found a job and took pleasure in his new life. Many of Richard's victims would arrive with most of their belongings in their cars, which he later sold. Scott Davis had mentioned that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview. Richard ultimately targeted Timothy Kern as his last victim. Timothy, 47, encountered the same job search difficulties as the other victims. He found a promising job opportunity, but it required him to move to a different location. Timothy was reluctant to leave his children behind. Since his divorce in 1997, he had kept a strong bond with his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. As a dedicated father and passionate baseball coach, Timothy prioritized spending quality time with his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their family connections through social media, particularly Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about an exciting job opportunity to manage a large 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing with all rent and utility costs covered, and a generous weekly salary. However, he was concerned about the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was apprehensive about leaving his family, the opportunity was too appealing for Timothy to ignore. He got ready to move on Sunday, although feeling a sense of sadness about being away from his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He spent valuable time with his sons before leaving the following morning. One of Timothy's sons received a loving message from him, but nobody realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different location behind an abandoned shopping center in Akron. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were unaware of Richard's address, but they eventually arrested him. Richard didn't realize that Joe, the landlord of his rental home, had contacted the police, who then used Richard's IP address to locate him. As a result, when Richard called and messaged Joe, it assisted the police in tracking him down. He was arrested on November 16, 3 days after killing Timothy. Richard faces charges for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with numerous other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Raffy were tried in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauley, and Timothy Kern. Brogan Raffy had the opportunity to accept a deal for a lighter sentence by providing information about Richard, but he chose to decline. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Although Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to refute the evidence against him when Scott Davis, a key witness and victim, agreed to testify in court. There was also substantial evidence from the crime scene, including personal belongings and identification of the victims found at Richard's home. Despite his claims of innocence, the evidence clearly pointed to his guilt. Richard's trial took place later that year, resulting in the death penalty. He was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Pleas Court for resentencing, but the outcome was unchanged. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard appeared via video from the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He was sitting in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks during the sentencing. Richard's other attorney, Donald Gallick, argued via video that adding multiple consecutive sentences was unnecessary for someone already facing the death penalty. However, Assistant Summit County Prosecutor Jack Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should remain unchanged. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common agreed with the prosecutors, stating that multiple consecutive sentences were needed to accurately represent the defendant's criminal actions. During the trial, Richard inquired whether he could reclaim a Celtic cross that had been taken during the investigation. He mentioned that the necklace had been passed down in his family and expressed his desire to give it to his newly married daughter, insisting that it was unrelated to the case. He stated that there was no reason for them to keep it, emphasizing that it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It was noted that it was ironic for a murderer responsible for taking the lives of many innocent people to portray himself as a caring father. It remains unclear whether his treatment toward his daughter was genuinely good or merely a facade intended to influence the jury's perception of him as compassionate and incapable of being the serial killer he was charged with being. His mother was there, trusting in his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, and the confession of his accomplice heard in court, Richard had to face the consequences of what he had done. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother stayed quiet and didn't say anything more. Richard appealed the decision but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has repeatedly asserted his innocence, but no one believes him. He is currently imprisoned at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard almost managed to evade capture, but his gun jammed, which allowed Scott Davis to escape. Had Scott not escaped and reported the incident, it's likely that the serial killer in the woods would have gone unnoticed, resulting in many more victims. The story begins with an online job ad that the victims responded to without thinking twice. The key takeaway is to be careful when you see job postings online. Make sure to research both the job and the employer thoroughly to protect yourself from scammers or dangerous individuals. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Donald Harvey. Donald Harvey was born on April 15, 1952, in Hamilton, Ohio, to Ray and Goldie Donald. He was the oldest of 3 children and was affectionately known as Donnie by his parents. Following his birth, the family relocated to Boonville, Kentucky, a small community in the Appalachian Mountains. Despite struggling with poverty, they was loving and nurturing to their children. However, their marriage began to deteriorate due to their economic struggles. As a child, Donald was quiet and mostly kept to himself, showing no apparent signs of abnormality. However, he suffered a traumatic past, being sexually abused and assaulted by at least 3 men. The perpetrators included his uncle on his mother's side, who molested him during visits to his grandmother's home, and an older neighbor who offered him money for sexual favors. Additionally, at the age of 18, Donald claimed to have been sexually assaulted by his roommate, Randy White. While a traumatic past can contribute to the development of psychological issues, Donald was often perceived as a loner in school. He preferred to focus on his studies and rarely participated in extracurricular activities, opting to read instead. Although this helped him earn good grades, it also led to teasing and the label of teacher's pet. After graduating from Sturgeon Elementary School, Donald enrolled in Boonville High School in 1968. Despite his good academic record, he soon found himself bored with the daily routine and decided to drop out. However, he eventually earned his diploma through a correspondence school in Chicago and received his general education development at the age of 16. With no clear future plans, Donald struggled to figure out his life's direction. He eventually moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he landed a job at a local factory. However, when the factory closed down in 1970, Donald lost his job and was left uncertain about his future. Around that time, his mother called and asked him to visit his ailing grandfather, who was in Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky. Donald agreed to the visit. During his daily visits to see his ailing grandfather, Donald formed strong relationships with the hospital workers, who grew to genuinely like him. Their admiration for him led to an unexpected job offer. Although it is unclear what motivated Donald to want to work as a nurse's aide, some speculate that he needed to earn a living after losing his previous job. Despite lacking formal training in nursing or medicine, the hospital staff entrusted him with responsibilities. Donald's job at the hospital involved caring for patients on his own, including tasks like changing bedpans, inserting catheters, and giving medications. Despite the challenges, Donald's early weeks at the hospital passed without incident. However, on the evening of May 31, 1970, Donald was attending to 88-year-old stroke patient Logan Evans in a private room. Suddenly, Evans rubbed his own feces on Donald's face. While it's likely Evans wasn't fully aware of his actions due to the effects of his stroke, the incident triggered something within Donald, leading him to completely lose control. Without realizing what he was doing, Donald suffocated Evans with a blue plastic bag and a pillow until the patient was motionless. He then checked Evans' pulse with a stethoscope to confirm his death. Following the killing, Donald disposed of the plastic bag, cleaned Evans' body, dressed him in a fresh gown, and showered him before notifying the nurses about the patient's passing. After the first incident, no one suspected anything out of the ordinary. Donald went to cover the patient with a sheet, but instead, he used his hand to smother him to death. It was surprising that he was able to do this without anyone noticing, especially since he used a pillow to kill him. The next day, Donald was assigned to care for another elderly patient, 69-year-old James Tyree. He made a critical mistake by using the wrong size catheter on him. When James realized what was happening, he yelled at Donald to remove it. Donald used his hand to restrain him, which caused him to vomit blood and eventually die from an air embolism. Once again, no one suspected foul play. With no one suspecting him of any wrongdoing after his first two murders, he became more confident and careless. Just 3 weeks after the first murder, Donald deliberately cut off the oxygen tank of 42-year-old patient Elizabeth Wyatt. He later claimed that he had ended her suffering, as she had expressed a desire to die. A nurse found Elizabeth dead 4 hours later, but no one questioned Donald about her death. Over the next 10 months, he took advantage of the lack of suspicion and killed 15 more patients under his care. He saw this as an opportunity to indulge his darker impulses, and he continued to kill without being detected. Donald's methods of murder varied widely, driven by a desire for pleasure or experimentation. He would often use smothering, sabotage oxygen tanks, inject lethal drugs, or overdose patients with medication. When angered, his methods became even more brutal. On one occasion, he inserted a coat hanger through a patient's catheter after an argument, puncturing the patient's bladder and bowel, which led to infection and death a few days later. Despite the brutality of his actions, Donald considered himself a mercy killer, the self-proclaimed angel of death who was playing God with vulnerable patients. He cloaked his horrific deeds in a mask of kindness, believing that his actions were somehow merciful. On March 31, 1971, the day he was arrested for burglary while drunk, Donald's life took a turn. In his incoherent confession, He revealed his dark secret to the police, but no one took him seriously. As a result, he faced only charges of petty theft and paid a fine instead of serving prison time. This close call prompted Donald to attempt to turn his life around. For a few months, he tried to regain stability and eventually landed a part-time job as a nurse's aide at Cardinal Hill Hospital in Lexington. In June 1973, Donald started a second nursing job at Good Samaritan Hospital in Lexington. He held both nursing positions simultaneously before eventually moving on. Between August 1974 and September 1975, he took on 2 non-nursing roles, a telephone operator in Lexington and a clerk at St. Luke's Hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. Notably, Donald was able to resist his urge to kill during this period. A possible explanation is that he had limited access to patients in these new roles, which may have also contributed to his decision to change jobs frequently. Donald's struggle to control his killing urges eventually became too much to manage, leading him to relocate to Cincinnati, Ohio in September 1975. He found employment at the Cincinnati VA Medical Hospital, working various roles including nursing assistant, housekeeping aide, and autopsy assistant. The hospital's night shift schedule and lack of supervision gave him unrestricted access to all areas of the hospital. Over the next decade, Donald murdered at least 15 patients while working at the hospital. He meticulously documented each crime in a diary, detailing the methods he used to kill his victims. These methods included poisoning patients' food and drinks, suffocating them with plastic bags and towels, and injecting them with lethal substances. Donald's experimentation with different methods was influenced by his study of medical journals, which he used to refine his techniques and avoid detection. Donald preferred cyanide as his method of murder, which he mixed into patients' food or administered through their gastric tubes. He accumulated a large stash of cyanide, approximately 30 pounds, which he stole from the hospital over time and kept at home for safekeeping. He stated that he began using morphine to kill patients in the 1970s, particularly in small hospitals in Kentucky where it was not heavily regulated. He also mentioned he used other methods, such as cyanide, arsenic, adhesive cleaner, and suffocation with a plastic bag. Despite the numerous deaths, he claimed to have avoided suspicion by making them appear accidental or due to natural causes. He revealed that in reality, he was a serial killer hiding in plain sight, preying on vulnerable patients. He took it upon himself to decide who lived or died, often without the patients' or their families' consent. He justified his actions as merciful, but he acknowledged that the truth was more complex. While he claimed that his crimes were motivated by compassion, other evidence suggested otherwise. He recounted that a turning point came in the early 1980s when his behavior became more erratic and driven by rage. He started dating a man named Doug Hill, but their relationship was tumultuous. After a heated argument, he poisoned Doug's ice cream with arsenic, and fortunately, Doug survived. This incident marked the first time he tried to harm someone outside of the hospital, revealing a darker side to his nature. Donald's behavior took a dark turn after a fight with Carl Heller. He moved in with Carl Heller, but the relationship quickly became toxic. Donald's jealousy and paranoia led him to suspect Heller of cheating, and he started lacing Carl's food with arsenic to keep her from leaving. As time passed, Donald's cruel actions extended beyond his home. He poisoned a female neighbor's drink with hepatitis serum during an argument, and she almost died before receiving treatment. Unfortunately, another neighbor, Helen Metzger, was not as fortunate. Donald poisoned one of her pies with arsenic, which ultimately led to her death. Donald's lack of consequences for his crimes emboldened him, and he became more confident and reckless. He felt like he was above the law, having gotten away with multiple murders. In April 1983, Donald's behavior escalated. After a disagreement with Heller's parents, he began secretly poisoning their food with small doses of arsenic. The following month, Carl's father, Henry, suffered a stroke and was hospitalized. During a visit, Donald saw an opportunity to strike again and laced Henry's pudding with arsenic. Henry died that night. Over the next year, Donald continued to target Carl's mother, Margaret, periodically poisoning her in an attempt to kill her. In January 1984, Donald's relationship with his partner, Carl, ended, and he was asked to leave their home. Donald reacted poorly to the breakup and spent the next 2 years trying to harm Carl using poison. He also attempted to kill one of Carl's female friends in a separate incident, but was unsuccessful. Although Donald did manage to hospitalize Carl at one point, his attempts to kill her ultimately failed. Donald's behavior raised suspicions on July 18, 1985, when security guards at his workplace discovered a suspicious collection of items in his gym bag. The contents included a gun, hypodermic needles, surgical scissors, gloves, a cocaine spoon, medical texts, occult books, and a biography of serial killer Charles Sobridge. As a result of the discovery, Donald was fined $50 for carrying a firearm on federal property and given the option to resign from his job quietly. Surprisingly, the incident was not documented in his work record, and the hospital did not investigate Donald for potential involvement in other crimes during his employment. He was able to secure a new job as a part-time nurse's aide at Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati just 7 months later, in February 1986. Donald Harvey's new employers were impressed by his work and soon offered him a full-time position at the hospital. Unbeknownst to them, Donald had a dark past, and he quickly fell back into his old routine. Over the next 13 months, he murdered 26 more patients and attempted to kill several others by tampering with their life support machines, injecting them with lethal substances, and suffocating them. The murder spree finally came to an end on March 7, 1987, with the death of 44-year-old John Powell. Powell had been recovering from a motorcycle accident, but his sudden and mysterious death raised suspicions. Due to Ohio's law requiring an autopsy in cases of vehicular homicide, the authorities were able to investigate Powell's death. During the autopsy, the assistant coroner detected a faint scent of almonds, a sign of cyanide poisoning. This discovery led the authorities to launch an investigation into Powell's death. Initially, they suspected Powell's friends and family, but they found no evidence or motive. The focus then shifted to hospital employees who had access to Powell's room, and Donald Harvey was one of the individuals they needed to rule out. Hospital employees were voluntarily taking polygraph tests to clear their names. Donald Harvey also was offered to take a test, but he didn't follow through. Instead, he called in sick on the day of his scheduled test. He had even purchased a book on how to cheat on lie detector tests. This raised suspicions, especially when investigators discovered his notorious nickname, Angel of Death, and learned about his questionable partner from the hospital. As the investigation continued, authorities focused on Donald due to the unusual number of deaths surrounding him. During questioning, Donald initially denied any involvement in John Powell's murder, claiming he was just a victim of circumstance. However, after hours of interrogation, he eventually confessed to putting cyanide in Powell's feeding tube. He claimed he did it out of sympathy for Powell and his family, but denied responsibility for the other suspicious deaths. Donald was taken into custody, and investigators began searching for more evidence. On August 11, 1987, Donald, then 35, confessed to committing 33 murders over the past 17 years. As the investigation continued, the number of murders he confessed to grew to 70. Donald's claims of multiple murders raised suspicions among investigators, who questioned the accuracy of the numbers he provided. To verify his credibility, they ordered a series of psychiatric evaluations by multiple experts. The tests concluded that Donald was sane and competent, able to distinguish right from wrong and conform to the law. In 1987, Donald was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years for the murders committed at Mary's Mount Hospital. The following year, he pleaded guilty to 3 additional murders and 3 attempted murders in Cincinnati, receiving 3 life sentences and 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. After a 2-year investigation, the remaining cases were closed due to insufficient evidence linking Donald to the crimes. The public was both shocked by Donald's actions, and many wondered what drove him to commit such heinous crimes. In a 1991 interview with the Columbus Dispatch, Donald revealed that his motivation stemmed from a desire for control. He felt that others had controlled him for 18 years, and he sought to reclaim power over his own life. Donald admitted that he enjoyed the sense of power that came with deciding who lived or died. Donald Harvey is one of the most notorious serial killers in U.S. history, not only due to the high number of victims, but also because he targeted people he knew personally, including his patients. An Associated Press article from 2001 listed him as the worst serial killer in the United States. Contrary to expectations that Donald would spend the rest of his life in prison and die of natural causes, his life took a different turn. On March 28, 2017, Donald was found severely beaten in his cell at the Toledo Correctional Institution, where he was being held in protective custody. He died 2 days later from severe head injuries. Months later, an inmate named James Elliott confessed to the crime in a letter to the Toledo Blade. James, who was serving a 37-year sentence for multiple burglaries, claimed that he had committed the murder to bring closure to the families of Donald's victims, who were from his hometown in Kentucky. In his letter, James wrote that he hoped his actions would bring some solace to the victims' families, as Donald had not received the punishment he deserved from the courts. In September 2019, James was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to the murder of the notorious Angel of Death. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Maria Munoz. Maria Munoz was born on January 25, 1989, in Puerto Rico, to Marisol Rodriguez and Jorge Luis Munoz. She was one of 3 children, and her early life was marked by a significant loss when her mother passed away. It was during this time that Maria met Joel Pellet, who was 11 years her senior. Despite their age difference, they got married in 2011. Joel Pellet, a nursing student at the time, had big dreams, and Maria was also a nurse. After their wedding, they moved to Laredo, Texas, where Joel Pellet secured a high-paying job as a nurse anesthetist at a local hospital. Maria Munoz, 31, was a devoted stay-at-home mom in Laredo, Texas, dedicating her time to caring for her 2 young sons and her husband, Joel Pellet, 40. She had left her job to focus on raising her children, and her days were filled with activities like taking them to the park and reading to them before bed. Although she was happy at home with her children, she had always dreamed of returning to school to become a nurse again. On the surface, Joel Pellet's family looked perfect. Joel Pellet often shared family photos with friends and colleagues, proudly talking about his wonderful wife and children. However, beneath the surface, a different reality was taking place. In 2018, after the birth of their second son, people close to Joel Pellet noticed a significant change in his behavior. He lost weight, gained muscle, and became more outgoing, especially with women. His behavior was flirtatious and not what was expected of a married man. He also started removing photos of his wife and children from social media, replacing them with pictures of himself alone. This change gave the impression that he was single. Around the same time, colleagues observed Joel Pellet growing closer to a surgical nurse named Janet Arando. It became clear that they were having an affair behind Maria's back. In early 2020, Maria discovered evidence of their relationship when she found airline tickets Joel Pellet had purchased for himself and Janet to travel to Europe. This revelation devastated Maria, leaving her feeling heartbroken, depressed, and betrayed. She had trusted her husband and thought their marriage was strong, but the discovery shattered her trust. Maria's world was turned upside down when she discovered that her 10-year marriage was a sham. Overwhelmed with emotions, she felt lost and alone, struggling to come to terms with the devastating truth. Seeking guidance, she began therapy sessions to cope with her mental health struggles, and her therapist prescribed medication to support her through this difficult time. As a way to process her emotions, Maria started keeping a journal to express her thoughts and feelings. As the situation between Maria and Joel Pellet continued to deteriorate, tensions escalated. On September 19, 2020, Maria visited Janet's house, where she found Joel Pellet's car parked in the driveway. Confronting him, Maria gave him an ultimatum: choose between her and Janet. Joel Pellet's response was clear: he chose Janet. The argument became heated, prompting Janet to call the police. However, by the time they arrived, Maria and Joel Pellet had already left the scene. Maria was driving with Joel Pellet when the police called her. She could hear him yelling in the background. When they arrived home, he became extremely angry and punched a hole in Maria's car windshield, demonstrating a disturbing level of aggression. The next morning, Maria sent Joel Pellet a text message stating her intention to hire a lawyer to help resolve their issues. Joel Pellet responded, suggesting they handle the situation on their own to avoid the costs associated with hiring lawyers. However, just a few hours later, Joel Pellet appeared to have a change of heart. He sent Maria an email expressing his deep sadness and emotional pain. In the email, Joel Pellet conveyed his desire to have an honest and calm conversation with Maria. Maria replied to the email, and they agreed to meet the following evening at around 5 p.m. On Monday, September 21st, before going to meet him, Maria was so nervous and then messaged her friend Yasmin Martinez that today they were going to meet. The next day, a terrifying turn of events unfolded. At around 1:40 a.m. on September 22, 2020, a distressed call was made to 911. Joel Pellet claimed that his wife may have ingested some prescription medication and was not breathing. DEA Officer Cruz was first on the scene, and his body camera captured everything that happened next. He found Joel Pellet at the top of the stairs near the master bedroom, Joel Pellet dressed in hospital gown and performing CPR on Maria, while their son slept in a nearby room. When the paramedics arrived, they took charge of performing CPR on Maria. Meanwhile, another police officer approaches Joel Pellet to ask about the pills Maria took. Joel Pellet quickly retrieved a pill bottle from the nearby bathroom, handing it over to the officers. An examination of the bottle revealed that it contained clonazepam, a prescription medication used to treat anxiety, panic attacks, and sometimes epilepsy, prescribed in Joel Pellet's name, not Maria's. The officer noticed two suspicious details. First, the pill bottle had been returned to the medicine cabinet, which is unusual in overdose cases where the bottle typically remains near the victim. Secondly, body camera footage showed Joel Pellet picking up the pill container from the floor and putting it in his pocket before claiming to have found it in the bathroom. DEA Officer Cruz wondered why he would need to retrieve the pills, which made him suspect that Joel Pellet might be hiding something. Another suspicious discovery was a needle catheter on the stairs of their home. This seemed odd to him. Joel Pellet and Maria had two young children, so finding a needle on the stairs raised questions about why it was there. Investigations revealed more than just a needle at the scene. A medical bag was found containing syringes and equipment, all neatly packed. While this might seem ordinary for an anesthesia nurse like Maria, the presence of these medical tools outside a hospital setting sparked questions for investigators. Joel Pellet told officers that Maria had been struggling with severe depression, which had gotten worse recently. Despite the efforts of the medical team, Maria could not be saved. Tragically, she was pronounced dead at 3:58 a.m. After Maria was declared dead, the officers took Joel Pellet downstairs to the kitchen for further questioning. Joel Pellet explained that he and Maria had met earlier that day to talk, during which they became intimate. Afterward, he took a shower, and when he came out, he found Maria sleeping. When he returned upstairs, he found Maria unresponsive and not breathing. As Joel Pellet spoke with the officer, his behavior seemed unusual. He was sweating heavily and struggled to answer basic questions about what happened. The officer noted that Joel Pellet's level of sweating was noticeably higher than anyone else present, including the first responder who had been trying to save Maria's life for the past 2 hours. This raised the officer's suspicion, leading them to take Joel Pellet to the police station with Sergeant Lisa Mata for more questioning. Joel Pellet was left alone in the interrogation room at the police station for a period of time before an officer arrived. Unbeknownst to him, his every move was being recorded on video. When officers reviewed the footage, they were shocked to see Joel Pellet's sudden and extreme behavior. He began screaming, crying, and hitting the walls, and even threw furniture around the room. His outburst was so loud that it frightened people in the hallway and nearby rooms. At 4 a.m., Sergeant Lewis Matt entered the room to speak with Joel Pellet. During their conversation, Joel Pellet opened up about the events leading up to Maria's death. He also made a shocking confession: he had been involved with another woman, Janet, and had been living with her for 5 months prior to Maria's death. Joel Pellet revealed that he had been in a relationship with Janet for 2 years, and Maria had been aware of the affair. According to Joel Pellet, on the night of Maria's death, he visited the home to discuss their marriage with Maria. After their conversation, they became intimate. Joel Pellet claimed that he thought Maria was asleep in her room, but when he checked on her 10 minutes later, he found her unresponsive. Joel Pellet also confessed to giving Maria the medication clonazepam, which had been prescribed to him to help with anxiety and depression. However, he was unable to provide details about the dosage or how many pills were left in the bottle before Maria took them. Despite further questioning, Joel Pellet was unable to provide any additional information to clarify the situation. After the interrogation, he was released. The next step in the investigation was to perform Maria's autopsy, which took place just 8 hours after her death. This quick turnaround meant that any substance that had caused her death should still be present in her stomach contents. However, when the autopsy results came in, they revealed a surprising twist: no pills were found in her stomach. Instead, the medical examiner's report revealed a small, red pinprick mark on the inside of her elbow. This mark was concerning because it suggested that Maria may have been injected with something. The discovery of this mark led investigators to explore its significance and potential connection to her death. As they dug deeper, they discovered a journal at Maria's house. Maria had started keeping a journal to cope with her anxiety and depression. The journal proved to be a crucial piece of evidence, helping investigators identify the culprit behind her death. Maria's journal revealed her heartbreaking experiences and thoughts. Despite knowing her husband Joel Pellet wanted to be with someone else, Maria wanted to preserve their family and expressed her love for him. In her journal entries, she poured out her emotions, detailing the pain of Joel Pellet leaving their home in Laredo and leaving her to care for their 2 young sons alone. Her diary and cell phone recordings also helped investigators uncover Joel Pellet's abusive behavior. Maria's journal entries exposed her emotional journey, from grief and heartbreak to healing and newfound hope for the future. She wrote about feeling trapped in a constant internal battle. She begged for her emotional turmoil to end, describing how her past haunted her, her present was confusing, and her future was uncertain. In a poignant cry for help, Maria turned to a higher power, pleading for an end to her suffering. She asked for laughter, peace, and happiness to return to her life, and for her heart and mind to be free from pain and torture. Maria Munoz's journal entries from the day before her death revealed her desire to move forward with her life. There was no indication of suicidal thoughts or plans to end her life. As a result, investigators initially ruled out the possibility of suicide. To gain a deeper understanding of the circumstances surrounding her death, they sought additional information. Dr. John Hunsinger, anesthesiologist, reviewed the autopsy findings and contacted the lead detective, DEA Cruz, to express his concerns. Dr. John Hunsinger recommended a comprehensive toxicology screening, which the investigators subsequently conducted. In January 2021, Sergeant Lewis Matt and DEA Cruz received toxicology test results that contradicted Joel Pellet's claim that Maria had been given clonazepam. The report actually showed that Maria's body did not have that drug. However, it revealed something more astonishing: the presence of 7 other powerful drugs. These medications, typically used in surgical procedures, included morphine, Demerol, Versed, propofol, and ketamine, as well as lidocaine and Naren. Specifically, propofol and ketamine are commonly used as sedatives and painkillers during surgeries. Administered through and for. The unusual presence of these drugs was significant, as they are tightly controlled and rarely accessed outside of anesthesiology departments, making it difficult for even many medical professionals to obtain them. The discovery of propofol in Maria's system was the most startling revelation for the investigators. Investigators believe that Joel Pellet, as a nurse anesthetist, had access to propofol due to his profession. Dr. Hunsinger, who worked with Joel Pellet and had experience with propofol, was shocked by the amount found in Maria's system, saying it was the highest amount he had ever seen. This led doctors to believe that propofol was the direct cause of Maria's death. They reasoned that, given his profession, Joel Pellet would have known the proper dosage to either anesthetize someone or cause an overdose. Additionally, a small mark on Maria's arm suggested that she may have been injected with some substance. Considering the autopsy report, Joel Pellet's suspicious behavior, and Maria's journal entries, the investigators believed they had enough evidence to arrest Joel Pellet for the murder of his wife. An arrest warrant was promptly issued, and authorities took Joel Pellet into custody without incident, as if he had anticipated and accepted his fate. Joel Pellet was then taken to the police station, marking a new phase in the investigation. The trial started on March 21, 2023. As the legal proceedings unfolded, both the prosecution and defense presented their cases. A prosecution team composed entirely of women known as Maria's team utilized Maria Muñoz's journal entries to construct a compelling case against Joel Pellet. By sharing Maria's diary entries, prosecutors wanted to show the jury that Maria was a wonderful, caring, and intelligent mother whose vibrant spirit shone through the pages of her diary. The prosecutors alleged that Joel Pellet first drugged Maria by lacing her drink with a substance to make her sleepy. Once she was unconscious, they believed he injected her with propofol. Additionally, they suspected that Joel Pellet deliberately delayed calling 911, waiting long enough to ensure that first responders would be unable to revive her when they arrived. The prosecution team stated that Maria's journals helped them understand the challenges she faced, which fueled their determination to seek justice in her case. Roberto Pauley, Joel Pellet's lawyer, informed the jury that his client had been trying to work on his marriage with Maria Muñoz before her death. Roberto Pauley noted that the medical examiner's report still did not clearly state the cause of Maria's death, and there was not enough evidence to prove Joel Pellet was responsible for her death. Roberto Pauley pointed out that Joel Pellet had given Maria a medication called Naren, used to counteract overdoses, on the night she died. He also acknowledged that both Joel Pellet and Maria had struggled with drug addiction in the past. However, Roberto Pauley argued that Maria had willingly taken the drugs without being forced, as there were no signs of trauma or coercion on her body. Despite this, investigators found that Maria did not have a history of drug addiction and that Joel Pellet was the only one who could have provided her with the large quantity of propofol. Maria was murdered, and Joel Pellet was put on trial for the crime. During the trial, it was revealed that Joel Pellet had given Maria a substance to calm her down, and he had brought home drugs, including propal, from work. The jury quickly reached a verdict, finding Joel Pellet guilty of murder after just 1 hour of deliberation. The trial lasted for 9 days, concluding on March 30, 2023, with the guilty verdict. Joel Pellet was later sentenced to life in prison for the murder, plus an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence and a $10,000 fine. This sentence was handed down on April 27, 2023. The motive behind Joel Pellet's killing of his wife Maria Munoz is not entirely clear, but the prosecution believes it was driven by his desire to end his marriage and start a new relationship with his girlfriend Janet Aridon. As a result, Joel Pellet was held accountable for his actions. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi Fonseca Fernandez was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Not much is known about her early family life. Samadi grew up in Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. She attended a local school. Samadi often used force or deception to get what she wanted. Samadi's striking looks and perfect figure make her a magnet, especially to men. Samadi's beauty and charm are overshadowed by her greed, vanity, and self-interest, which ultimately drives men away. Furthermore, she is extremely jealous and aggressive. Samadi, due to her youthful resemblance to Barbie, spent several years working at a Universal Company bookstore, dressing up as the iconic doll. After graduating from high school, Samadi started a long-term relationship with Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, a local television journalist 16 years her senior. Their relationship resulted in the birth of children, Christopher in 1996 and Christina a year later. However, constant arguments and jealousy eventually led Samadi to end the relationship in 2012. Shortly after, Osvaldo, 53, died suddenly. Osvaldo did not include Samadi in his will. Samadi took drastic action and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent relatives and heirs from entering. Samadi also took away Osvaldo's valuables. Osvaldo's family was furious and took Samadi to court for theft. Police intervened and forced Samadi to leave the house, but no criminal charges were filed against her. Samadi had other relationships, most notably with Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Samadi's third daughter, Maria. Although some reports claim the couple were officially married, the relationship ended in divorce after a few years. It was strange that some of Samadi's lovers disappeared or died mysteriously under mysterious circumstances. But for a long time, for some reason, no one paid any attention to it. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadi. He was murdered during a robbery. The killers were never caught or brought to justice. As with the previous case, there was much speculation surrounding Samadi's possible involvement, but there was no solid evidence linking her to the crime. Samadi's most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Gerardo Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. Gerardo Cruz lived with his mother, Ana Patricia, who soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who raised Gerardo Cruz as his own son. Gerardo Cruz attended a regular school, developed a passion for motorcycles, and met his future partner, Carol, at a young age. By the time he was 23, Gerardo had settled down with Carol and their 4-year-old daughter, Genesis, in the suburban home of his aunt and uncle in San Sebastian. To support his family, Gerardo Cruz took a job at a local bakery. It was around this time, in the summer of 2015, that Gerardo Cruz met Samadi, a 40-year-old woman who frequented the bakery. Despite her age, Samadi was attractive. Samadi began having affairs with men much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably delighted Samadi. Gerardo Cruz was one such affair. Despite the significant age difference, Gerardo Cruz quickly fell in love with Samadi and began to meet secretly. Samadi came to the bakery every day to see Gerardo Cruz, and other employees took notice of Samadi's frequent visits. Samadi would bring his 19-year-old daughter, Cristina, with him to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo Cruz was able to balance his family life and secretly date Samad without either woman finding out. He eventually let his guard down. He began bragging about his success with women and began sharing stories with friends and colleagues about Samadi, describing her as a great mistress who showered him with gifts. After just a few months together, in October 2015, Samadi discovered the truth about Gerardo Cruz having a pregnant wife and a child. Samadi was so angry that she started calling and texting Carol, Gerardo Cruz's wife, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo Cruz if he didn't belong to her. Gerardo Cruz tried to beg Carol's forgiveness. As for Samadi, he did not take her threat seriously, believing that she would quickly calm down and find a new boyfriend. Just days after breaking up with Samadi, Gerardo Cruz saw a man secretly filming a young girl's underwear with his phone. Gerardo Cruz filmed the man, stopped the girl, and advised her to report the incident to the police. He then chased the man, trying to capture his face on camera, until the man escaped in a taxi. Gerardo Cruz posted the video online and it quickly went viral. The man was identified as Luis Somano Delgado, a former member of the Ministry of Finance. The media picked up the story, and Gerardo Cruz became a national celebrity, outing Luis Somano Delgado in interviews. However, Luis Somano Delgado's lawyer accused Gerardo Cruz of wrongdoing, claiming that the video's distribution was illegal and preparing to file a lawsuit. Gerardo Cruz was surprised, wondering why he was being prosecuted instead of the man who committed the crime. Gerardo Cruz gave a radio interview confidently, without fear. The next day, he canceled his meeting with Oswald, citing an emergency after receiving a text message from Samadi, supposedly to discuss another interview with a young woman in a park. Unsuspecting, Gerardo Cruz met with her, but instead of journalists, two men stole his bag, beat him, and stabbed him multiple times. Gerardo Cruz called Oswald when he was unconscious, and Oswald called the police and paramedics. Gerardo Cruz was taken to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. Gerardo Cruz underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in saving his life. He passed away in the intensive care unit on November 19. Gerardo Cruz's funeral was attended by a large number of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. The community came together to express their hope that the police would quickly apprehend the perpetrators and bring them to justice. Initially, the investigation explored multiple theories. The first was that Cruz was a victim of a robbery gone wrong. This seemed plausible, given that he was attacked in a park, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife. The first theory is that Gerardo Cruz was the victim of a botched robbery, as he was attacked in a park, his bag stolen, and stabbed. However, Gerardo Cruz recently released a video exposing a nationally known former official, which has fueled another theory, that the attack was a revenge killing. The media speculated that the former official, Somano Delgado, may have hired a hitman to silence Gerardo Cruz, who had tarnished his reputation. The murder has sparked widespread debate in the press. Police later identified and tracked down the two men. The footage was made public and shown repeatedly on news programs, with viewers encouraged to watch the footage closely. Soon after, the identity of one suspect was confirmed when he voluntarily surrendered to the police, cooperating with the investigation in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. The investigation quickly identified several accomplices and organizers of the crime, Samadi and her daughter Cristina, thanks to information provided. Those involved, including taxi driver Ronald Archie, worker Cesar Chavez, a young miner, and Omar Costa, were arrested. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all those involved in the crime through phone calls and text messages. Samadi was identified as the mastermind who had carefully planned the murder for his daughter Christina. They enlisted the help of friends Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez to find two assassins to kill Gerardo Cruz and stage a robbery in the park at night. Omar Costa later joined the plot, tasked with ensuring Gerardo Cruz was present at the park. Samadi chose October 7th as the date of the massacre. Samadi kept in constant contact with all the suspects, assigning roles and ensuring everyone followed the plan. Furthermore, Samadi asked the participants to take an item from Gerardo Cruz as proof that the crime had been completed. The evidence against Samadi was a series of text messages outlining the murder plan and the roles of each participant in detail. The motive behind the crime was a case of jealousy. She had carefully planned the crime and even involved her own daughter, who assisted her in every step of the process. Both Samadi and her daughter were taken into custody immediately, and the possibility of releasing them on bail was ruled out due to concerns that they would attempt to flee the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar Costa, who was responsible for surveillance and was the youngest participant in the crime. As a minor, Omar Costa was handed over to authorities that specialize in handling juvenile offenders. The investigation took about 1.5 years to complete, and the trial did not begin until December 2017. It was discovered that Samadi had a history of criminal activity. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Samadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez, received 25 years in prison each. Omar Costa, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. Gerardo Cruz's family has received $140,000 in moral damages. After the verdict was announced, relatives expressed gratitude to the court for giving Gerardo Cruz's killers a fair punishment. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Rowena Irani. Rowena Irani was born on February 18, 1994, in Karachi, Pakistan, to parents Turan and Bam Irani. In 2004, when Rowena was 10 years old, her family moved to Wichita, Kansas, in search of better opportunities. The goal was to provide Rowena and her older brother, Rashid, with a brighter future in America. However, the 9.11 tragedy 3 years earlier had created a climate of prejudice that affected the Irani family, making it difficult for Rowena and Rashid to form friendships due to the hostility they faced. Despite the initial difficulties, Rowena and Rashid eventually settled in and expanded their social circle. Rowena joined her high school's ROTC program and drill team, which helped her develop skills, even though she didn't plan to pursue a military career. After a tough start, Rowena blossomed into a strong-willed, friendly, and caring individual. Rowena graduated from Wichita Heights High School in 2012 and enrolled at Wichita State University, choosing to live at home while pursuing a degree in psychology. Her goal was to earn a master's degree and become a counselor for teenagers. Rowena's mother was extremely proud of her dedication to her studies. From the start, the Irani family's sacrifices clearly had a positive impact on their children. Rowena, in particular, wanted to help others reach their full potential. She started working at the Wichita Children's Home, a place for neglected, abused, and emotionally distressed youth. Rowena formed strong bonds with the children, showing her remarkable ability to understand and support them. Rowena made the children feel welcome and cherished, creating a sense of security. Every morning, Rowena would gently wake the children, and every evening, she would bid them farewell. The children looked forward to sharing their daily experiences with her, no matter how small. Rowena also helped the children set goals and find ways to achieve them, showing her dedication to their well-being. Rowena demonstrated a strong commitment to helping troubled youth. And her outstanding academic record as a psychology major indicated she had found her purpose in supporting others. She seemed to be living the American dream her parents had sought. However, problems in her personal life soon arose, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome. In May 2016, Rowena reconnected with Dane Owens, a family friend, at her brother's wedding. Dane came from a wealthy Kansas family and had joined the U.S. Army after high school. His military service ended abruptly due to a severe traumatic brain injury from an explosion. After a medical discharge, Dane attended Kansas State University, where he met Rowena. They soon developed strong feelings for each other. But problems soon arose due to Dane's behavior. He was possessive, controlling, and had a quick temper. People close to Rowena said that Dane became obsessed with the idea of marrying her and starting a family right away, even though she wasn't sure about it. At 22, Rowena wanted to finish college before making such a big decision. Dane's insistence on marriage and his intense behavior scared Rowena, her feel like the relationship was moving too fast. When she asked for space, Dane wrote a disturbing letter, begging her not to leave him and hinting that he might harm himself if she did. This led Rowena to end the relationship. At first, it seemed like Dane accepted Rowena's decision when she reiterated that she wasn't ready for marriage or starting a family. However, just 1 week after giving her space, Dane started pressuring her again about getting engaged, planning a wedding, and having kids. His actions made it clear that he saw Rowena as a prize to be won. Instead of supporting her education and career, Dane seemed determined to limit Rowena to a domestic role. Rowena is worried about her relationship with Dane because she feels he is too controlling of her, and this makes her wonder if they are really a good couple. By September 2016, Dane's increasing aggression had become alarming, prompting Rowena to confide in her brother, Richard, a police officer. She shared several disturbing incidents, including Dane's claims of committing brutal killings during his military service. He even bragged about murdering women and children while deployed in Afghanistan. Rowena found these revelations deeply disturbing. Furthermore, Dane had expressed his intention to kill an ex-girlfriend who had ended their relationship. He confessed that following the breakup, he became consumed by a desire for revenge and struggled with emotional instability, to the point where he even contemplated committing murder. Richard agreed with Rowena's assessment that Dane posed a genuine threat and he seemed capable of violent acts against her. On September 23, Rowena ended her relationship with Dane. She blocked his phone number and social media profiles to distance herself. However, Dane refused to accept the breakup and started planning his revenge. Despite recovering from shoulder surgery and being unable to handle a firearm properly, Dane bought a .45 caliber handgun. On October 3, over a week after the breakup, he secretly visited Rowena's residence while her family was away. Surveillance cameras caught him parking his vehicle away from the house and approaching stealthily, hiding the firearm in a sling due to his injured arm. Dane entered the house through an unlocked door and waited for Rowena. When Rowena appeared, he aimed his gun and fatally shot her in the head. This was a deliberate and carefully planned violent act committed by someone who was excessively controlling. After shooting Rowena, Dane quickly left the house through the back door and drove away to avoid being caught. During his escape, he stopped to get rid of important evidence, including the handgun magazine and Rowena's phone, in various ponds in Wichita. Meanwhile, Rowena was left alone in her home, severely injured and bleeding heavily, for several hours. At around 4 p.m., her mother, Tarun, returned home after being dropped off from work. Tarun was worried because Rowena usually picked her up. But she couldn't reach Rowena by phone. She got a ride from a coworker and went home, where she found Rowena lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by a large amount of blood, with severe head injuries. Turan immediately called for emergency services, but it was too late to save Rowena. Rowena's condition was extremely serious due to a gunshot wound and significant blood loss. She fought for her life at Wesley Medical Center for nearly 24 hours, while her family stayed by her side, hoping for a miracle. Tragically, she passed away on October 4th at just 22 years old. Her promising life was tragically ended by a violent act. Despite their intense grief, Rowena's family was determined to find justice for her murder. Richard quickly focused the investigation on Dane, Rowena's ex-boyfriend, who had been causing her a great deal of fear before her death. Dane was soon found and brought in for questioning. After being arrested and taken to the police station, he admitted to holding a grudge against Rowena for breaking up with him. When questioned further, Dane tried to claim that Rowena's death was an accident, but the evidence proved this was not true. Dane told investigators that he had shown up at Rowena's home unannounced, carrying a loaded .45 caliber pistol and hoping to talk about getting back together. However, Dane claimed that the firearm was hidden in his arm sling and he never intended to threaten or harm Rowena when he entered the house looking for her. He said when Rowena suddenly appeared, he was startled, causing a moment of panic due to post-traumatic stress disorder from time in the military. Dean alleged that he accidentally fired a shot in her direction. He explained to detectives that he was left shocked and horrified after the bullet accidentally struck Rowena in the head, resulting in her immediate collapse to the ground. Panicked, he fled the scene and later got rid of the evidence. Despite his claim that the shooting was an accident caused by a reflex, detectives did not believe him. The security footage and his admission of sneaking up on Rowena with a loaded gun, his attempt to dispose of evidence, and the execution-style gunshot wound to Rowena's head all suggested a planned and deliberate murder. In November 2018, Dane Owens stood trial for Rowena's murder after years of delays, with the case being heard by a jury. The prosecution presented case with substantial evidence, leaving no doubt about Dane's guilt. They portrayed Dane as a possessive and controlling individual who turned violent when rejected. Dane's delusional fantasies led him to end Rowena's life. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Dane guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated burglary, resulting in a life sentence in Kansas. Dane was punished for taking Rowena's life due to his wounded pride. He will not be eligible for parole for 25 years, and his chances of release are low due to the brutality of his actions. He is currently serving his sentence at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Hutchinson, Kansas. Rowena's life was ended by someone she once loved. It's heartbreaking to think of the terrible actions of Dane, who took Rowena's life, depriving her of a bright future at such a young age. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan was born in 1980 in Toronto into a large and close-knit family. There were 5 children in the family, and Brett was the second. He had 2 older brothers, Christopher and Leland, and a younger brother, AJ. Brett's parents always tried to instill the right values in their children by promoting a healthy lifestyle. Brett's father worked at a newspaper and was also a fitness trainer. His mother dedicated herself to homemaking and loved growing flowers. Brett's mother could be strict and harsh in raising her 4 sons, while his father was gentle and reserved. Each son in the family pursued his own path. After graduating from high school, Brett enrolled at the University of Toronto. However, he quickly struggled with his studies. After 2 painful breakups, Brett could not concentrate on his studies and eventually decided to drop out of university. Brett felt jealous as he watched his friends and classmates build relationships, get married, and achieve success in life. Meanwhile, he felt like he was not accomplishing anything significant, which made him feel like a failure. After getting a job as a painter, he realized that this career was not suitable for him. At the same time, Brett was concerned about his appearance, spending a lot of money on personal needs and on girls. As a result, he accumulated a large debt of up to 60,000 Canadian dollars, which he had no way to repay. When creditors started demanding money, Brett fell into a deep depression. He felt like a complete failure but did not dare to confess his problems to anyone. In desperation, Brett was determined to find a way out of his difficult situation and make a large sum of money quickly. He decided to rob a bank. On October 20, 2007, he put his plan into action. He chose a bank near his home and created a disguise by covering his face with bandages, pretending to have an injured left arm, limping, and carrying a stack of papers. Brett robbed his first bank by pretending to be sick. He entered and approached the cash register. There, he handed over a note demanding cash and warned the clerk that he was hiding a weapon. Out of fear, the clerk quickly gave Brett the money in the cash register. The amount was only about $1,000, which Brett was not happy about, but he decided not to attract any more attention. So he took the money and left the scene. Brett was caught on security cameras during the robbery. Despite this, he was not caught initially because he avoided using the same technique and changed his disguise each time. Instead of using fake bandages to look like a sick person, he wore a fake beard and hat to hide his identity. His next bank robberies achieved different results. Throughout his 12 bank robberies, Brett accumulated more than $28,000 in cash. He was always evasive, trying to avoid the police. Finally, on June 20, 2008, the police identified Brett, and he was arrested during his 13th attempted robbery. This surprised everyone because Brett had previously volunteered at a children's hospital and was now a robber. Brett was sentenced to 5 years in prison. During his sentence, experts conducted psychological evaluations and concluded that he showed no signs of aggression or violence. Additionally, Brett did not use illegal substances and did not suffer from mental disorders during his sentence. After 2 years, Brett was paroled for good behavior. The prison staff were impressed with him because he was a pleasant, charismatic, and hardworking young man. They felt that he had only made one serious mistake due to the pressure of debt and deserved the second chance. Brett's record showed that he was a model prisoner with a low risk of reoffending. Upon his release, Brett was required to attend a course of psychotherapy and report any problems he encountered in his family relationships or at work. This helped him avoid reoffending. However, the reality turned out to be much more complicated than Brett had anticipated. The debts were still outstanding, and he could not pay them off. Finding a job was also difficult because no one wanted to hire an ex-convict, even though he had skills in painting. In desperation, Brett declared bankruptcy. Fortunately, his parents supported him financially, allowing him to continue his studies at university, this time in information technology. Brett also continued to see a psychologist under court order and tried to stabilize his life. During therapy, Brett was advised to be more open and honest with the people around him. In September 2011, a friend of Brett's arranged a blind date with a girl named Kristen Baxter. Kristen was a physical therapist, lived alone in an apartment, and had a small dog. She also loved to travel. When Brett met Kristen, they immediately had a special connection. They quickly found they were compatible and attracted to each other. They both loved animals and traveling, which created a bond between them. Not long after, Brett and Kristen began a romantic relationship. Brett and Kristen spent a lot of time together, attending sporting events and hiking. They also went on a vacation together in the Bahamas with Kristen's family. Kristen's dog immediately took a liking to Brett, which made a good impression. Brett's life seemed to be back on track, and he no longer exhibited suspicious behavior. He longed for a quiet and cozy life with his beloved girlfriend. When Brett moved into Kristen's apartment in January 2013, their relationship entered a new phase. They began thinking about getting married. However, Brett was hiding a truth from Kristen. In reality, he was not the person she thought he was. While Brett's brothers were building their careers and becoming independent, he was just studying and living off his parents' money. He hid his real life and focused only on enjoying the vibrant city life with Kristen. They enjoyed going to cozy restaurants and swimming in the pool at night, but Brett never revealed the truth about his circumstances. Brett and Kristen often traveled to warm countries. However, their lives were turned upside down when Brett's father suddenly passed away. Brett moved in with his mother to help with the funeral arrangements and support her during this difficult time. During this period, Brett confessed to his mother, Susan, that he loved Kristen very much and dreamed of marrying her. However, he did not have enough money to buy a decent engagement ring, so he hesitated to propose. Brett's mother was touched by her son's words and gave him money to buy an expensive ring. With a luxurious diamond ring, Brett proposed to Kristen, and she accepted. The couple began to prepare for their wedding. However, Brett still had many worries about the future. He didn't know how he would support his family. He also had legal issues, bankruptcy, and debt that he hadn't disclosed to Kristen. To address these issues, Brett decided to focus on finding a decent, stable job. In early 2016, Brett finally found a good job in the IT field. He was very happy to share this news with Kristen, and they decided to celebrate with their families. However, everything changed when his new employer learned about his criminal past and fired him immediately. This took a serious toll on Brett's self-esteem. To avoid upsetting Kristen, Brett decided not to tell her about this failure. Instead, he lied and said that he would work remotely from home. Every day, when Kristen went to work, Brett would pretend to work on the computer. Kristen was very happy, thinking that Brett would start earning a lot of money and they would be able to stand on their own. Kristen started preparing for the wedding scheduled for September 16, 2016. She chose the most beautiful and expensive options they could afford. A luxurious banquet hall was booked for the ceremony, and the bachelor party before the wedding was to be held at a luxurious ski resort. The couple even started looking for a spacious and cozy house to settle down in after the wedding, as they were tired of living in a small apartment. Susan was extremely happy, thinking that her son was independent, had graduated from college, and had a high-paying job. She looked forward to the day when her son would get married and move into his own house. But the reality was completely the opposite. Brett had lied about all of this. He was trapped in his own fabricated thoughts and could not get out. In an effort to earn money, Brett took on any side job he could and even helped his mother with housework to earn money. He went to see his mother every day, looking for things to do and fixing things to get paid. Susan became suspicious when she saw her son hanging around the house all day, constantly doing this and that instead of going to work. If Brett made as much money as he claimed, why did he need these odd jobs? Susan began to ask her son difficult questions, which Brett initially tried to avoid. But then he remembered his therapist's advice about the importance of honesty and finally dared to confess his troubles to his mother. He begged his mother for significant financial support, promising to continue looking for work. However, his mother was extremely disappointed and angry when she learned the truth. She refused to give him any money and threatened to tell Kristen everything. Brett was extremely angry at his mother's harsh words, and he feared that Kristen would leave him if she found out the truth. Brett was desperate because he didn't want to lose his girlfriend and have to move back in with his mother. He feared that if that happened, he would feel like a loser for the rest of his life. So he decided to carry out a strange plan. Unable to legally purchase a gun due to his criminal record, Brett chose to purchase a crossbow to avoid attracting unnecessary attention. He purchased the old crossbow with cash. The next day, Brett returned to his mother's house under the pretext of helping with home repairs to earn money. However, he had other intentions. On August 25, 2016, his mother, Kristen, woke up early as usual and went to work. Meanwhile, Brett stayed home and pretended to work. In reality, he was preparing for another act. To avoid suspicion, Brett created a keystroke automaton on his computer to give the impression that he was working. He also set up an automatic email function to send at a specific time to create an alibi. Next, Brett gathered all the necessary items for his disguise into a gym bag, including clothes and a wig. To avoid being caught on surveillance cameras, he sneaked out of the house through the fire escape and went to Susan's house incognito, wearing clothes and a wig so that no one would recognize him. However, when he reached the door, he took off all his disguises and went inside. Once inside, Brett tried to convince his mother to give him money. But Susan continued to refuse. A fierce argument broke out between them, with Susan demanding that Brett confess his lie to Kristen. Otherwise, she would expose him herself. As the argument became more heated, Susan sensed something was wrong. She took advantage of the moment when Brett stepped outside and called her eldest son, Chris. She begged Chris to come and help resolve the conflict with Brett. Brett returned to the garage for an important reason: he had hidden a crossbow there earlier. Once he found the weapon, he began to prepare everything for the shot. However, this required more time and effort than he had imagined. At that moment, his mother entered the garage in a rage. Brett quickly found a nearby tool and struck her twice, hitting her in the cheek and ear. She screamed in pain and shock at the sight of her own son attacking her. A fight broke out between them. During the scuffle, both fell to the floor and rolled around, knocking over everything in their path. In the chaos, Brett found a long, dirty rag, and without thinking much, he used it to strangle her. Only after carrying out this act did Brett realize that things had gone terribly wrong. His original murder plan had turned into a nightmare. He remembered that his brother Chris, who had been called by their mother, was about to arrive at the garage. Brett decided to remove his brother from the list of potential witnesses. He jumped up, grabbed the crossbow, and started preparing. A plan to kill Chris formed in Brett's mind. After preparing everything for the new crime, Brett hid in the garage, waiting for Chris. Soon, Chris entered the garage to find their mother, not knowing that he was in danger. Brett quietly approached Chris from behind and shot him in the back of the head. Chris fell immediately. Brett dragged his body close to their mother's and covered it with a tarp. Brett quickly changed his clothes and prepared to run away. However, he did not expect that his younger brother, AJ, was visiting and appeared at the door. For Brett, this was a disastrous situation. Brett began to consider his next move: run away after changing his clothes or stay and kill AJ. He feared that when his brother discovered the bodies, AJ would immediately call the police and he would be arrested. This fear drove Brett to commit another murder. After finding AJ, Brett followed him. Brett approached AJ with the intention of shooting him in the back of the head, just as he had done to Chris. However, this time things did not go as planned. AJ sensed danger and noticed that Brett was carrying a weapon. A scuffle broke out between the two brothers. During the fight, Brett attempted to injure AJ by shooting him in the neck with the crossbow. AJ screamed in pain and fled. He ran out of the house, leaving a trail of blood in the sand, and eventually collapsed from exhaustion in the driveway. It was then that Brett learned that there was another brother sleeping in the house, Leland, 39. He was awakened by AJ's terrified screams. Leland looked out the window and saw his brother covered in blood on the road. Panicked, he rushed to the phone to call 911 but couldn't make it. At that moment, Brett rushed at him in a frenzy. Leland and Brett started a fierce fight, spreading throughout the house and turning it into a bloody mess. Taking advantage of Brett's distraction, Leland sneaked out without being detected. He crawled to the neighbor's house and passed out right in front of it. The kind neighbors immediately called the police. Meanwhile, Brett angrily ran back to the yard and saw AJ, injured, trying to crawl away. Obsessed with the desire to kill his brother, Brett chased after AJ before the neighbors discovered him. However, while chasing AJ, Brett was surprised to find that Leland had told the neighbors everything. From that moment on, Brett had no chance to save himself. The police were about to arrive at the crime scene and put an end to his bloody journey. Brett's murder plan had failed. In desperation, Brett decided to surrender and returned to the house. There, he sat on the porch, holding a bottle of water, and waited for the police to arrive. When the police and ambulance arrived, paramedics confirmed that their mother and Chris had passed away. AJ still had signs of life, but his condition was critical. However, on the way to the hospital, AJ passed away due to his injuries. Leland, despite his serious injuries, survived. He was taken to the hospital for treatment and medical attention and gradually began to recover. Meanwhile, Brett was arrested at the scene of the crime and faced serious charges of first-degree murder and attempted murder of his brother. The news left Kristen reeling, especially since their wedding was only 3 weeks away. Kristen was devastated when she learned the truth about her lover. Brett's criminal past, including a robbery conviction, financial hardship, unemployment, and the horrific murder of his family, left her in disbelief. She wondered how she could have lived with this man all this time without knowing the truth. Kristen immediately called off the wedding and returned to her apartment. There, she discovered a strange device that Brett had made to create an alibi. Mistaking it for an explosive device, she panicked and called the police. The police quickly arrived at the scene, evacuated the residents of the building, and began to carefully examine the mysterious device. After a short time, they discovered that the device was just a clever invention of Brett's. Although initially concerned about the danger, the police later realized that the device was harmless. However, they were impressed by Brett's extraordinary ingenuity and care. His intelligence and inner strength were undeniable, but unfortunately, he used them for the wrong purpose. At trial, Brett pleaded guilty and made a deal with the prosecution. He admitted that his actions constituted second-degree murder and hoped for a lighter sentence. Brett explained that he only intended to use the crossbow to scare his mother and have a serious talk with her. He wanted his mother to finally understand and support him, but things got out of hand. Brett claimed that he had no intention of hurting his brothers, they were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The prosecution believed that the defendant had planned to harm his mother from the beginning, not just stop at a conversation. They argued that Brett had brought the crossbow with the intention of killing Susan and should be held strictly responsible. As a result, he was convicted of first-degree murder of his mother and second-degree murder of his brother. The court handed down harsh sentences, 3 life terms with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In addition, Brett was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the attempted murder of his brother Leland. All sentences were to run concurrently, meaning he could only apply for early release after a quarter of a century. Brett's only surviving brother, Leland, received the sentence with relief. Despite the pain and bitterness of the loss, Leland truly respected Brett's remorse. In Leland's mind, his brother was not a bad person at heart but had lost his way in life. Brett had taken the path of deceit and was eventually mired in the quagmire of his own lies. He could no longer get out, which led to a terrible tragedy. Brett Ryan's terrifying story serves as a warning to us all. It demonstrates that small lies and the concealment of truth can lead to dire consequences. When we continue to lie, the lies grow and accumulate, becoming unmanageable. As a result, not only is the liar's life ruined, but so are the lives of their loved ones. Brett Ryan had the opportunity to change after his first prison sentence. He had the support of his girlfriend and a loving family, and he could have gone to school and found a job. However, he chose to lie, leading to a disastrous outcome and ruining more than one life. Whether Brett truly admitted his mistake or just wanted a lighter sentence is not as important as the lessons he learns while serving his life sentence. Can he look back on his life, reflect on his mistakes, and strive to become a better version of himself? Only Brett knows the answer. However, his story certainly makes us reflect on our own actions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan was raised in a loving and prosperous Canadian family with 3 brothers. His parents, Bill and Susan, set a positive example and taught their children valuable life lessons. Bill worked at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and had diverse interests, while Susan managed the household and cared for her family without outside help. The whole family admired Susan, who showed equal love to all her sons. Although Brett seemed to get in trouble less often, it was because he had a talent for talking his way out of difficult situations. He was charismatic and well-liked by his peers. Brett's charm earned him many friends in school, and he went on to attend university after high school. However, he felt pressure to outdo his brothers, so he started a house painting business in the local newspaper. Initially, he did well and made his mother proud, but eventually he realized that it wasn't as fulfilling as he thought and had to drop out of university to focus on it. As his brothers graduated and found jobs, Brett stayed behind with his parents and younger brother, accumulating debt and struggling with depression. By 2007, his debt had reached $60,000, and he struggled to manage his finances, hiding his troubles behind volunteer work and kindness. Desperate and broke, Brett decided to rob a bank on October 28, 2007. He disguised himself with old clothes, a hat, and a scarf that covered his face, and limped into the bank on the outskirts of his neighborhood. After threatening a bank employee, he left with just over $1,000, realizing he would need to rob many more banks to settle his debts. After his first robbery, he was worried that the police would catch up with him, so he avoided going home for a few days. He told his mother he had a job in a nearby town and spent his nights sleeping in his car, periodically sneaking back to his house to check if the police were watching. Fortunately, everything seemed quiet, and no one was looking for him, which made him feel like he was doing things right. As he continued to rob banks, Brett changed his appearance each time. He stopped wearing his old clothes and instead bought second-hand ones or found them in the trash. After each heist, he would burn the clothes he wore. He also bought a fake beard from a costume store to disguise himself. The bank employees he threatened always remembered the bearded man, which helped to create a false identity. The Toronto newspapers wrote about the bearded robber, but Brett never made a large sum of money from his crimes. The most he stole was $3,000. Eventually, his luck ran out, and the police spotted his car on surveillance cameras, following him all the way home. By then, they still didn't have concrete evidence to prove his guilt, so they decided to keep an eye on the suspect. For 15 days, Brett didn't commit any robberies, which was unusual since he typically struck every 3 or 4 days. The police were starting to think they had the wrong guy and were wasting their time. However, their luck changed when Brett left his house, got into a car, and later got out near a bank wearing a disguise. He entered the bank, stayed for a bit, and when he tried to exit, the police were waiting to arrest him. After months of searching, they finally caught the notorious bearded robber. Brett was investigated for 7 months and charged with armed robbery. Interestingly, despite having a permit to carry a gun, Brett never brought a weapon with him during his robberies, not even a kitchen knife. Brett was arrested and faced 19 charges, leading to a prison sentence. He, along with his family, filed multiple appeals, which resulted in 11 charges being dropped. Once eligible, Brett applied for parole and submitted a petition. In it, he explained that he had committed the crimes while struggling with severe depression, resulting from 2 failed relationships and significant debt. Brett emphasized that he had not used weapons and had no intention of harming anyone during the crimes. The parole board accepted his remarks, but required him to undergo a psychological evaluation. This had a positive impact on Brett, and he took the opportunity to reconnect with his family, with whom he had not communicated while incarcerated. The parole board noticed the positive changes in Brett and granted him early release on November 24, 2010. However, his newfound freedom was bittersweet and even more challenging than before. Before his imprisonment, Brett was a painter carrying emotional burdens. After his release, he was a bank robber and ex-convict with a tarnished reputation. After the robbery incident, Brett struggled to find a job due to his notorious reputation. Even people who initially hired him for house painting services would cancel once they recognized him as the bearded robber. To make matters worse, their neighbors, who once admired Susan's garden and frequently visited, began spreading unpleasant rumors about the family. As a result, the Ryan family decided to sell their house and move to Scarborough. In their new location, Susan started a new garden and Brett managed to find a job at a trading company, although his salary was not high. Fortunately, his parents were able to support him financially as he worked to rebuild his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist who consistently advised him to maintain a close relationship with his family. This advice proved to be valuable. Despite this, Brett's financial situation remained a challenge. However, his life took a positive turn in September 2011 when he met Kristen Baxter, a wonderful young woman who owned an apartment with a beautiful sea view. She maintained a healthy lifestyle through sports and didn't concern herself with Brett's past. The couple enjoyed traveling together, including a trip to Australia. Brett's parents were thrilled to see their son happy and believed Kristen would encourage him to reach his full potential and become a responsible member of society. Brett's life was improving, but an unexpected event occurred that threatened to derail his progress. His father's sudden passing was a devastating blow, and Brett's depression began to resurface. To cope, he increased his visits to a psychologist and devoted more time to supporting his mother financially, although his own funds were limited. As their long-term relationship evolved, Brett knew it was time to take a significant step. No longer just careless teenagers, the young couple needed to build a life together. Deeply in love with Kristen, Brett decided to make a heartfelt proposal. He had saved up some money and discussed his plans with his mother, wanting to make the proposal unforgettable and impossible for Kristen to refuse. Susan understood what her son Brett was hinting at, so she gave him money to buy an engagement ring for his girlfriend, Kristen. Previously, the couple had discussed their future together, and Kristen didn't need an extravagant gift to prove Brett's commitment. However, Brett wanted to make a grand gesture and purchased a gold ring with a large diamond for her. Needless to say, Kristen accepted his proposal. Once engaged, the couple began making wedding plans. Brett agreed with Kristen's decisions, but he was shocked by how expensive everything was and how it made him worried about his job security. This motivated him to find a well-paying job to support their future together. He discovered an engineering job opening at a large tech company, created a resume, and applied for the position. After a successful interview, he got the job, which thrilled him. Brett excitedly shared the news with Kristen and his mother, and he even asked his mother for money to buy a fancy suit for his new job. Brett's mother had agreed to buy him a suit for a job interview. However, just after the purchase, the company called to inform him that his application was rejected due to his criminal past, which the security service had discovered. Brett was devastated by the news and felt like giving up. He questioned the point of continuing with the interview process if no one wanted to hire an ex-criminal, regardless of his attempts to reform. Disheartened, Brett decided to abandon his university studies and instead use the money his mother and brothers had given him to finance his wedding to Kristen. He didn't inform his family or counselor about his decision to drop out of university, nor did he share the news about being rejected for the engineering job. Brett created a false image of himself as a successful businessman. He'd dress up in a suit and tie, then change into painting clothes on his way to work. He lied to his relatives, telling them he worked in an office, and supported this fiction by posting photos on social media that he downloaded from the internet. When he was with his family, Brett would often pretend to receive important work calls, making excuses to take care of urgent business matters. He was skilled at deceiving those around him, and no one suspected that he was actually just a house painter. In September 2016, Brett's 5-year relationship with Kristen was nearing its climax as they planned their wedding. He even agreed to rent an expensive restaurant that would cost $100 per guest. The Ryan family was overjoyed, believing that Brett had finally turned his life around, with a prestigious job, a fancy apartment, and a beautiful fiancée. Brett's lies had spiraled out of control, and there was no escape from the consequences. With the wedding only a month away, he had invested heavily in the event. To foot the bill, he repeatedly borrowed money from his mother, and when she could no longer help, he shamelessly demanded that she get a better-paying job. Around the same time, he planned an extravagant bachelor party in August, inviting all his friends and brothers. As his web of lies began to unravel, Brett confided in his counselor about the situation. For a year, he had deceived his family into believing he worked as an engineer for a technology company. The psychologist was dismayed that his longtime client had gone astray again and advised Brett to confess everything to his mother. After much contemplation and procrastination, Brett finally came clean to her. His mother was outraged, having proudly told everyone about her supposed wonderful son. She insisted that Brett reveal the truth to Kristen, threatening to expose him herself if he didn't comply. Moreover, she warned him that his brothers were already aware of the situation and sided with her. Brett couldn't muster the courage to confess to Kristen, having struggled to tell the truth to his mother in the first place. Brett knew the wedding was only a month away, but he remained silent about his lies, even though it would be better for Kristen to know the truth beforehand. He was unsure what he was hoping to achieve by keeping quiet, but he couldn't shake the thought that his mother might expose him to Kristen, causing a scandal. Every time Kristen's phone rang, Brett's heart skipped a beat, fearing it was his mother calling to reveal his secrets. He breathed a sigh of relief when it was just a friend inquiring about the wedding plans. Desperate to stop his mother from interfering, Brett hatched a sinister plan. Because he was not allowed to use firearms due to his previous robbery conviction, he decided to use a crossbow, a silent and deadly weapon. Brett had learned how to shoot a crossbow from his late father, who used to practice target shooting in their garden. Though his father had taught him well, he never intended for Brett to use this skill for harm. Brett purchased the crossbow and arrows from a sporting goods store and hid them away, preparing to carry out his disturbing plan. Brett created an alibi to deceive others into thinking he was at home all day. He rigged a fan to turn on at a set time, which then moved a spoon across his computer keyboard, automatically posting pre-written comments on YouTube videos. On August 25th, Brett dressed in disguise to conceal his identity and left his house through the back door to avoid detection by security cameras. He took a train to his parents' house, intent on taking care of anyone who might threaten his and Kristen's well-being. When Brett arrived unexpectedly at his parents' house, his mother Susan was taken aback. Despite her poor health that day, Brett persisted in trying to convince her not to tell Kristen anything, eventually becoming angry and aggressive. Susan sensed something was wrong and, intimidated by her son's intense behavior, warned him that she had already called Christopher and he was on his way to their location. Brett's anger and adrenaline surged out of control as he ran to the garage to grab a crossbow. However, his emotional state prevented him from making a clear shot, so he instead used the butt of the gun to bludgeon his mother. To ensure she was dead, he placed plastic bags over her body and tightened a rope around her neck. Brett then loaded the crossbow with arrows and hid in the bushes, waiting for his brother Christopher to arrive. When Christopher called out for their mother or brother, Brett shot him in the neck from behind, causing his death within minutes. Susan, their mother, had also called their youngest brother Alexander, who was also shot in the neck, but the arrow didn't go deep enough, and he began screaming for help. Throughout the chaos, Leland was oblivious to the violence unfolding in the garage and garden, unaware that his own brother was committing the crimes. He slept in his second-floor room until a scream disturbed him. Rushing downstairs, Leland found Brett trying to strangle Alexander, and a fierce fight broke out between the two brothers. Once Leland gained the upper hand, he pushed Brett aside and ran to the neighbors to call the police. Brett realized he was trapped in the house with no escape, overwhelmed by the consequences of his actions. He acknowledged that he had ruined his life and there was no turning back. He took out his phone and wrote a letter to Kristen, begging for her forgiveness. When the police arrived, they found Brett sitting next to his brother Alexander, both of them covered in blood. Despite his injuries, Alexander was still alive, but later succumbed to his wounds in the hospital. Brett voluntarily handed himself over to the police, asking to be handcuffed and taken to the station. There, he confessed to the crimes and revealed the location of his mother's body, hidden under packages in the garage. He expressed regret, stating that he had never intended to kill Susan, only to scare her. However, he had planned to kill Christopher and Alexander, using them as witnesses to his twisted scheme. If they hadn't arrived that day, they would still be alive, just like they had been nearly 10 years prior. Brett attempted to justify his actions by citing his depression, but it didn't lessen his punishment. Despite confessing to the crimes without resistance and cooperating with the investigation, he received 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder. He will be eligible for parole in 2041. Leland, the sole survivor of the tragedy, has declined to speak to the press, but he is well known in Toronto for his traumatic experience. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Alexandria Costiel. Alexandria Ally Costiel was born on September 11, 1997 in St. Louis, Missouri, to Cindy and Keith, and had a brother, Andrew. Her contagious smile and warm personality instantly drew people to her. With her infectious joy, Ally made everyone around her feel comfortable, earning her a beloved status in her community. From a young age, Ally's bubbly nature stood out. She possessed an innate ability to make people smile and brought happiness wherever she went, whether playing with friends, interacting with classmates, or spending time with her family. Ally's friendly nature made her positive energy infectious. She could easily connect with people from all walks of life and was never hesitant to strike up a conversation with someone new. In addition to her charming personality, Ally was known for her unwavering kindness and compassion. She was always willing to lend a helping hand or offer a listening ear to those in need. Ally attended Lindbergh High School, where she was a track athlete and cheerleader. It was during her time at Lindbergh that she met her best friend, Maddie Norris, and the two formed an unbreakable bond. Their friendship was more than just a casual acquaintance. They became like sisters. Ally and Maddie shared an unwavering trust and deep emotional connection, and they both had a zest for life, constantly seeking new experiences and adventures together. As a result, they tackled challenges, laughed, and created lifelong memories. One of their favorite activities was spending lazy afternoons lounging on the couch, engrossed in a romantic comedy. Their go-to movie was Legally Blonde, which they would watch repeatedly, always finding something new to laugh at and enjoy. The lighthearted humor and relatable characters provided them with endless entertainment. When Ally obtained her driver's license, she and Maddie discovered the joy of hitting the open road. They would often take Ally's convertible, top down, and cruise through town, feeling the wind in their hair and the warm summer air on their skin. As Ally's senior year of high school approached, she found herself without a date for the upcoming prom. Despite receiving a few offers, she hadn't been in a relationship or had a serious boyfriend, which made her feel disappointed and consider skipping the event. However, her friend Maddie stepped in to help. Determined to make things right, Maddie offered to accompany Ally to prom as her date, and Ally, touched by her friend's kindness, gratefully accepted. On prom night, Ally wore a stunning red dress. After graduating from high school, she eagerly enrolled at the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss, in Oxford, Mississippi, which had always been her dream school. The university's large size and thriving community drew her in. As a sports enthusiast, she was particularly excited about the college's renowned football program, which was steeped in tradition and community spirit. In the fall of 2006, Ally began her freshman year at Ole Miss, where she majored in marketing and business. Ally was drawn to Ole Miss for one particular reason. She'd always dreamed of meeting a charming Southern boy, falling in love, and starting a family. She thought the university's campus was the perfect place to find her future partner. As she began her new life chapter, Ally took advantage of the opportunities Ole Miss offered. The university's medium size and strong sense of community allowed her to interact with people from diverse backgrounds. The lively campus atmosphere fostered a sense of belonging, and Ally enthusiastically participated in various university events and activities. During her time at Ole Miss, Ally joined a sorority, Alpha, and was one of its founding members. She also served as the president of the Ole Miss Golf Club. In addition to her academic pursuits, Ally embraced the university's rich traditions, including its beloved mascot, the Ole Miss Rebels. Attending the University of Mississippi was a time of growth, friendship, and self-discovery for Ally. Her friendly, kind nature made it easy for her to connect with others, and soon she became a familiar face on campus. One of her college friends, Morgan Hall, was particularly impressed by her remarkable strength and determination when she effortlessly rearranged her dorm room furniture on her first day as a freshman. At a campus party, Ally met Elizabeth Brick, and they instantly clicked. It was as if they had known each other for years. Their connection was that strong. They seemed destined to be friends, and Ally felt an instant bond with Ely, as they called her. Ally had always been captivated by sunsets. The changing colors of the sky as the sun descended towards the horizon mesmerized her. Among the colors that made up a sunset, pink held a special place in her heart. It was not only her favorite color, but also one that brought her a sense of calmness and peace. The soft, delicate hues of pink reminded her of nature's tranquility and beauty. Determined to share her appreciation for the beauty surrounding her, Ally made it her mission to capture stunning shots of sunsets. She was on a quest to take as many photos of this natural phenomenon as possible. To showcase her collection, Ally created an Instagram account dedicated to her sunset photos, eager to share her love for them with the world. Ally met Brandon Held, a boy from Fort Worth, Texas, one night at a bar downtown in Oxford. She was immediately attracted to him and developed a crush. She invited him to several of her sorority dances, and over time, her feelings for Brandon grew stronger. Brandon was raised in a loving Christian family in Fort Worth. His upbringing was privileged, given that his father was a prominent doctor. He had a typical Texan childhood, enjoying outdoor activities like hunting, fishing, and soccer. During a school break, Ally's best friend, Maddie Norris from St. Louis, Missouri, visited her in Oxford. Maddie was eager to meet Brandon, having heard Ally's constant praise. However, Brandon failed to reach out or make an appearance, which hurt Ally deeply. She had trusted him to make an effort to connect with her and her friend. Maddie, witnessing Ally's pain, felt terrible for her. Although Ally seemed hurt by Brandon's actions, she remained resilient and determined to make the most of her time at Ole Miss. During her freshman year, she flourished academically and socially, making friends and enjoying her college experience. As Allie's senior year at Ole Miss approached, July 2019 was a time of excitement and anticipation for Allie and her parents, Cindy and Keith. With Allie about to begin her final year of education, her parents decided to visit her in Oxford for a few days. They were eager to see their daughter thriving in her element and get a glimpse of her life at the university. That summer, Allie taught a fitness class and attended summer school. When her parents arrived, Allie enthusiastically showed them her favorite spots around town, taking them on a personalized tour of her campus. She shared her excitement about the various buildings and landmarks, giving Cindy and Keith an opportunity to witness her growth and take pride in her accomplishments. While Allie's parents were visiting, Cindy cooked her daughter's favorite dinner one evening, and they shared a special meal together, bonding over the delicious food and reminiscing about old times. Because Allie loved everything beachy, she and Cindy drove to a store and bought beach-themed home decor items for her apartment. They spent a few hours shopping for items that would add a touch of coastal charm to Allie's living space, including beach-themed decorations and colorful throw pillows. As Allie's parents were preparing to return home to St. Louis, Allie begged them to stay one more day, wanting them to experience more of what Oxford had to offer before they left. Despite their initial plan, Cindy and Keith eventually agreed to stay an extra day, on July 19th, the day they were originally supposed to return home. Later that evening, around 7 p.m., Allie's parents called, and Allie answered the phone, still groggy from having just woken up from a nap. She told her mom about her plan to go out with friends that evening. Unaware of the conversation's significance, Cindy told Allie she loved her and hung up, unknowingly speaking to her daughter for the last time. Sardis Lake, a 30-minute drive from Oxford, is a vast area popular for hunting camps and recreational spaces. The area is large, and the local sheriff's department patrols it regularly to ensure security. On June 20, 2019, a police officer was assigned to patrol Sardis Lake in the early morning hours. Darkness surrounded the isolated lake, where the officer drove, sensing desolation. He spotted something odd near a picnic table, got out and was met with horror, a young woman's body riddled with 9 gunshot wounds. The officer was shocked by the discovery and immediately called for backup. Within minutes, additional officers and medics arrived at the scene. As they arrived, the backup officers spotted a purse in a nearby ditch. One of the officers cautiously approached the bag, opened it, and found a wallet inside. The wallet contained an Ole Miss student ID and a driver's license with the name Alexandria CLE. After Allie's body was discovered at Sardis Lake, Cindy and Keith, her parents, had to be contacted. At the time, they were at their home in St. Louis, far away from their daughter, and they never expected to receive a phone call in the middle of the night with the devastating news that Allie had been the victim of a homicide. This news was extremely difficult for Cindy to accept. When Allie's friends learned about her murder, they were equally shocked as her parents. Her friends felt a deep void in their hearts as they remembered Allie, a vibrant and full-of-life person. In response to this tragic news, they turned to social media to express their grief and demand justice. They created the hashtag #JusticeForAllie to unite their voices and amplify their demands for justice. After Allie's murder, close friend Brashonda Kendricks, an Ole Miss graduate, expressed sorrow. Brashonda, who worked in student housing, described Allie as having contagious happiness and a positive outlook, always wearing a big smile. They met at Crosby Hall, where Brashonda worked, and Allie would stop by to say hello. Brashonda remembered Allie as a sweet girl who lived life to the fullest. Allie's sorority, Alpha Sorority, released a statement expressing their shock and sadness at the loss of one of their members. They stated that they were grieving the loss of Allie Costiel and sent their deepest sympathies to her family during this incredibly difficult time. The sorority hoped for solace for their Alpha I sisters. At the Sardis Lake crime scene, where Allie's body was found, investigators discovered several cans of White Claw seltzer scattered on the ground, along with 140 caliber shell casings. A ballistic expert was called in to analyze the scene and reconstruct the events. According to the expert's analysis, the killer was sitting across from Allie on the picnic table benches when they fired the initial shot. After firing the first shot, the shooter stood up and began circling the table, closing in on Allie with each step, firing additional rounds. The expert theorized that one of the rounds fired by the shooter missed Allie and became lodged in the wooden picnic table. Crime scene investigators thoroughly searched Allie's apartment, looking for any evidence that could help identify and catch her killer. During the search, they found Allie's Apple Watch, but despite their efforts, they couldn't find her phone either at the crime scene or in her apartment. Strangely, some of the messages she received the night before her murder were synced with her watch. As investigators analyzed the content of these messages, they found that Allie had been chatting with Brandon Thiesfeld for a long time. The messages revealed that Allie and Brandon had planned to meet up. The detective in charge of Allie's murder case decided to contact Brandon early on Sunday, the day after Allie's murder. He asked Brandon to come to the police station for an interview, but Brandon said he couldn't make it that day. Instead, Brandon offered to meet the detective at 8:30 a.m. the next morning. However, Brandon failed to show up for the scheduled interview on Monday morning. After Brandon failed to appear for his scheduled interview at the police station regarding Allie's murder, the police began tracking his cell phone activity. The data revealed that Brandon was heading north on Interstate 55 towards Memphis. The police interpreted this as an attempt to flee, so they obtained an arrest warrant and issued a "Be on the lookout" alert for his vehicle, which had a distinctive license plate, making it easily identifiable. Within 2 hours of the bolo being released, the Memphis Fugitive Task Force located Brandon's car at a gas station, where he was sitting in the driver's seat at a pump. Task Force agents took Brandon into custody and notified the Mississippi police. A search of Brandon's vehicle yielded a .40 caliber gun. Additionally, when Brandon exited his car, he had bloodstains on his clothing. Following his arrest and extradition to Mississippi, detectives retraced Brandon's movements in the days leading up to Allie's murder. On Saturday, July 20th, Brandon spent the day with friends, going bowling. The next day, he visited another friend's house, bringing a 6-pack of beer and his .40 caliber gun. The friend told detectives that they talked for a while, but when the friend woke up on Monday, Brandon was gone. During the investigation, detectives found that Brandon had never been in a physical fight and had no history of violence. They also spoke with Brandon's friends and Allie's loved ones, learning that the couple had met at a local Oxford bar during their freshman year of college and started dating casually. However, during their sophomore year, Allie's loved ones noticed a change in her attitude towards the relationship, suggesting she was more interested in it than Brandon. This difference in interest eventually led to tension between the two, with Brandon blocking Allie's contact because she would frequently go out, get drunk, and call him. A year had passed since Brandon and Allie's initial breakup, and they reconnected during the summer before Allie's senior year. They decided to give their relationship another chance and started dating again. However, this reunion was short-lived, as Allie was tragically murdered. Brandon was subsequently charged with capital murder, the most serious criminal offense, and faced the possibility of the death penalty. The state believed Brandon was guilty of kidnapping Allie by luring her to Sardis Lake, which led to the capital murder charge. When news of Brandon's arrest broke, the people of Oxford were shocked, and the details of Allie's murder were widely reported. Brandon's arrest sparked a flurry of speculation and rumors, with community members sharing their theories. Reporters flooded the town, seeking interviews and information from those close to Allie and Brandon. This intense media scrutiny brought both positive and negative attention to Oxford, with outsiders looking on with a mix of fascination and concern. In late September 2019, Brandon denied committing murder when he pleaded not guilty in court. As detectives worked to gather evidence, they re-examined text messages exchanged between Brandon and Ally. These messages revealed that in April 2019, 3 months before her death, Ally was preparing for the spring semester finals while also dealing with the possibility of being pregnant. On April 14th, Ally sent Brandon a picture of a home pregnancy test with inconclusive results. Brandon responded, suggesting they wait and see if she was indeed pregnant. If so, he made it clear they wouldn't keep the baby and told Ally, "We can get a pill," implying an abortion. However, Ally was uncertain about terminating the pregnancy, mentioning she might meet someone who'd love her and the baby. Despite this, Brandon remained firm in his decision, telling Ally that having a child would ruin his life. The detectives discovered CCTV footage of Ally leaving a bar on Oxford Square at around 11:45 p.m. on July 18th. About an hour later, at 1:30 a.m., Ally met Brandon, and he drove them to Sardis Lake. Brandon's defense team stated that Ally and Brandon had been drinking throughout the day. According to Brandon's defense team, when they arrived at Sardis Lake, they sat at a picnic table, listening to music. At some point, Brandon got up, walked to his truck, used drugs, and then returned to Ally, where he retrieved his .40 caliber weapon. Brandon's defense team claimed that a shooting occurred across the lake, and after the incident, Brandon sat down and continued talking to Ally. However, things suddenly changed, and he fatally shot her. The defense team argued that Brandon's actions were due to his intoxication from drugs and alcohol. In contrast, the detectives and Ally's family believed that Brandon murdered Ally because he suspected she was pregnant, which would have negatively impacted his life. They saw the murder as premeditated, cruel, and calculated. On August 27, 2021, Brandon accepted a plea deal offered by the state, which spared him from the death penalty. As part of the agreement, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In a show of support, Ally's friends and family attended the court hearing, all dressed in pink, Ally's favorite color. After the judge announced the sentence, Brandon turned to Ally's family and expressed his remorse for his actions, asking for their forgiveness. He acknowledged the immense pain he had caused and hoped they could find it in their hearts to pardon him. According to Ally's autopsy report, the official conclusion was that she was not pregnant at the time of her death. However, her mother, Cindy, is convinced that Ally was expecting a child and lost it. A memorial was set up at Sardis Lake, the site of Ally's murder, by her family and friends. Despite their grief, Ally's parents, Cindy and Keith, hold on to the memories of their daughter. The unspoken sorrow still affects them deeply. Whenever Ally's friends see a pink sunset, they are instantly reminded of her. In her memory, they have dedicated their lives to keeping her spirit alive and spreading love and light, ensuring she is never forgotten. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Lynn Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia. She grew up in a loving family with 2 older brothers. After Debbie's birth, her parents divorced, but her dad stayed involved in their lives. Later, their mom married Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. They lived in a small apartment near a military base in a quiet neighborhood. Debbie was a happy child who enjoyed spending time with friends, playing basketball, and collecting dolls. On January 13, 1972, when Debbie was 9 years old, she had dinner with her family. After that, her mom decided to send her to the laundromat, as she had done many times before. Debbie was supposed to keep an eye on the laundry while it washed, while someone else from the family would help her carry the clothes to the laundromat and back home. The laundromat was just a few hundred yards away from their home, right across the street, so her mom wasn't too worried about anything happening to her. Back then, it was quite common for parents to have their kids help with chores like laundry, and Debbie even made some friends with the other girls at the laundromat. That day, Debbie's mom initially planned for her older brother to go with her, but he was sick and preferred to stay home to watch his favorite TV show instead. So, the mother requested her husband to accompany Debbie to take the laundry. Debbie went along with her stepdad, taking a box of detergent on the way. Her stepdad dropped off the laundry, put it into 2 washing machines, and then left. Debbie stayed behind to wait for the washing to be done. After that, she was supposed to walk home and ask someone to collect the clean clothes because she couldn't carry them all alone. Sometime later, Debbie's mom noticed that she still hadn't returned, even though the laundry should have been done by then. It was getting dark outside, so she and her husband decided to walk to the laundromat, but Debbie wasn't there. The employee told them that she had left a while ago and hadn't come back since. Her mom became worried and started to walk around the nearby streets with Roy, searching for Debbie. Soon, they noticed something strange. A few dozen yards from the laundromat, in the parking lot next to one of the cars, there was spilled detergent. Since Debbie was carrying the box of detergent, her mom immediately thought it might have belonged to her. They continued to search the parking lot and the surrounding area, but there were no other signs of Debbie. Some neighbors, who knew the family well, also joined in to help with the search, but all their efforts yielded no results, and Debbie's mom decided to contact the police. The officers examined the area of the parking lot where the detergent was spilled and noticed their first potential lid. The detergent was scattered just inches away from a parked car, and on its door, they spotted several clear fingerprints. The fresh prints were found lower than the handle, which raised suspicion. The officers believed an unknown person may have grabbed the girl at that spot and touched the car. They took the prints for analysis and started looking for the owner of the vehicle to verify if the prints were theirs. With no other leads, the police started combing the streets, trying to find new clues or witnesses. The laundromat employee mentioned that she hadn't noticed anything suspicious. Debbie had been sitting and waiting for the laundry to finish, then took her box of detergent and left the building. Most likely, she headed home to ask someone to pick up the clothes. The police soon found the first witness, whose account immediately changed the course of the investigation. 12-year-old Sandra, along with her friend, was walking to the same laundromat, helping her carry dirty clothes. Suddenly, they saw a man grabbing a girl in the middle of the street and pulling her into his car parked nearby the laundromat. The girl was screaming and trying to break free, but he slammed the door shut, got behind the wheel, and drove off. The man nearly hit Sandra and her friend, one of whom started shouting after him, but he sped away. At the time, Sandra didn't realize she had witnessed an abduction. She thought the man was the girl's father or some other relative picking her up while she wanted to stay out longer. Because of this, Sandra didn't tell any adults about what happened or report it to the police. When she learned about Debbie's abduction, she provided investigators with crucial information. Based on her description, the perpetrator drove a dark pickup truck, likely a 1957 model. She described the man as young, white, with thick dark hair. He wore a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Another girl who lived in the same building as Debbie also shared her observations that evening. She was standing outside her apartment when a dark pickup truck drove past the building. At first, she thought it was her uncle behind the wheel, but when the driver stopped right in front of her and looked at the girl, she realized it wasn't him. According to her description, it was a white man with medium-length dark hair. She also provided investigators with a few more details about his appearance that she could remember. The girl mentioned that this man parked near their building, next to the same car where the spilled detergent would later be found. The police soon found another witness. A man who lived near Debbie's house was driving to the hospital to visit his wife. At one point, a dark pickup truck, likely a Dodge, nearly crashed into him, before driving off recklessly. The driver appeared to be around 30 years old with dark hair. However, the most crucial detail was that the witness also saw a girl in his car, seemingly attempting to escape while the driver held her with one hand. After hearing all the stories, the police were certain that Debbie had been kidnapped. They shared details about the suspect's car with all patrol units, and police sketch artists drew an image based on what 3 witnesses described. Some officers looked for similar vehicles and questioned their owners, while others led extensive searches for Debbie. As time went on, more volunteers and police officers from different towns joined the efforts. Altogether, about 4,000 people participated in the search, a record for both the city and the entire state. Detectives also investigated various people who knew Debbie, including all male neighbors, her stepfather, and her biological father, but all of them were ruled out as suspects. Her father, who lived in the same city, learned about his daughter's disappearance at work and immediately joined the search efforts. Detectives checked previously convicted criminals living within a few-mile radius of Debbie's home, but they didn't find any suitable suspects among them. The search for Debbie Randall lasted over 2 weeks, but found no results. On January 29th, some students joined the search and went to explore the wooded area near her house. During their search, they noticed tracks leading into the forest, as if something had been dragged. Following the tracks, they found a body and contacted the authorities. They had found Debbie Randall. She was dressed in the same outfit her mother had mentioned on the day she was taken: a lavender dress, dark blue zip-up jacket with a hood, and socks. Her lavender shoes, a recent Christmas gift that she adored, were missing. Medical professionals confirmed she had been strangled to death and had also been sexually attacked. Experts found a single dark hair on her body, most likely belonging to the killer. Since DNA analysis was not used at that time, experts couldn't do much with this evidence. They examined it under a microscope and, based on their knowledge at the time, concluded that it belonged to a man aged between 18 and 30 years old. Debbie's clothing was also covered in dirt. Lacking other leads, detectives decided to examine it more thoroughly. They contacted a geologist and asked him to work with their forensic team together. The detectives determined that some of the dirt consisted of a particular type of clay, mined less than 10 miles from their city. The geologists confirmed that it was indeed the unique northern Georgia clay that couldn't be found anywhere else nearby. There were also other dirt stains different from the first. They were traced back to another type of clay mined by a local company just 2 miles from where the body was discovered. Based on this information, detectives theorized that the perpetrator didn't kill the victim immediately. Instead, he drove her to remote areas where those types of clay were located. Most likely, he initially took her out of town where he sexually assaulted her. Then, he drove to the location where the second type of clay was mined, killed her, and took her to the forest, dragging her body behind the trees and leaving it there. Supporting this theory were not only the clay traces, but also the forensic analysis, indicating that Debbie was already dead when brought to the forest. If the perpetrator had killed her there would have been signs of a struggle around that area. The traces on the ground from the trail into the trees also suggested that the victim was already dead. The clay mining sites were very far away and hard to get to. Detectives thought that the killer may have worked there. They contacted the mining companies, and a supervisor from one of them supported this idea. It seemed unlikely that someone who didn't know the area could have brought the abducted girl there. Even the workers themselves sometimes find it challenging to move around in these large areas. Police checked employees from both companies, trying to find a man matching the description or the similar vehicle, but it didn't lead to anything. They also had fingerprints left on the car just inches away from the abduction site and compared them with all suspects, but this yielded no results either. The news of Debbie's brutal murder shook the entire city, and thousands of people came to bid farewell at her funeral. The local police department continued their efforts to find the killer and bring them to justice. but they couldn't find any new leads, hitting dead ends over and over again. Eventually, the case remained unsolved for many years. Detectives continued to work on it, checking dozens of suspects, but they couldn't establish their involvement. For the lead detective on the case, Morris Nix, Debbie's murder remained a priority throughout his entire career. The crime happened when he was just 19, and he had been involved in the search and investigation from day one. For many years, Nix pursued various leads, scrutinized different suspects, and eventually compiled a list of 4 men whom he considered the most likely suspects. When the FBI established a DNA database, experts were able to extract the genetic profile of the perpetrator from the hair found on Debbie's body. It was entered into the database, but no matches were found. The killer may not have been convicted of other serious crimes, or the crime happened before the collection of DNA samples. In 2015, 43 years later, the case was reopened. Detectives used modern technology to re-examine the victim's clothing, which had been stored in the evidence warehouse. They found biological material from an unknown man on it, but it had degraded over time, leading to a partial profile. In 2018, Debbie's mother shared her feelings in an interview. She expressed her long-standing hope to witness the police arresting her daughter's killer and ensuring accountability. After Debbie's tragic death, she found it unbearable to stay in the apartment filled with memories of her loss. Consequently, she relocated to a different city. Over the years, the lack of advancement in the investigation took a toll on her, causing slow devastation. Her sole wish now is to witness the resolution of this case before her time runs out. Unfortunately, that was not meant to happen. Just a few weeks after the interview, she passed away due to cancer at the age of 78, and she was laid to rest next to her daughter. Sandra, who witnessed the abduction at the age of 12, also spoke out in an interview. She said that she had never stopped blaming herself over the years. According to Sandra, she believed she could have stopped the perpetrator and prevented the abduction, even if it meant taking Debbie's place and dying. In 2019, the local police department received additional funding, enabling them to request a more detailed analysis of Debbie's clothing. This time, experts were able to extract a full DNA sample from it, but the perpetrator's DNA still wasn't in the FBI database. Debbie's father was also interviewed, and he shared that not a day had gone by over the decades when he didn't think about Debbie. He still kept a box of her old photos, hoping for only one thing: to reunite with his daughter in heaven. In 2022, shortly after the interview, he passed away. In the same year, detectives focused all their efforts on the one lead they had: DNA. They reached out to a company in Florida specializing in an innovative DNA analysis method called genetic genealogy. The police handed over all the biological samples they had collected over the years and waited. Experts created a profile of the unknown man and began searching for his relatives in public genetic databases. They needed to find people who had uploaded their DNA because family members' genetic material has similarities. Modern tools can detect even distant relatives. After examining thousands of potential relatives of the killer, investigators narrowed down their search to a family living in Marietta in 2023. They asked them to provide DNA samples, and they agreed. The analysis showed that the killer was indeed their close relative. So experts looked into their family more carefully and soon identified the most likely owner of the killer's DNA sample, a man named William Rose. However, there was a problem. Rose had taken his own life in 1974, just 2 years after Debbie's murder. But detectives were determined to finally close this case, no matter what. They obtained a warrant to exhume his grave, and experts took a direct DNA sample from his remains. After 51 years since Debbie's murder, the police finally got a full match. William Rose was indeed the killer. At the time of the murder, he was only 24 years old and had never been a suspect. It turned out that his relatives lived in the same building as Debbie's family. Rose regularly visited them, so investigators believe that he might have seen the girl on multiple occasions. Perhaps that evening, he was headed to visit his relatives, but saw Debbie coming out of the laundromat and heading towards her home. Based on the testimonies of her neighbors and other witnesses, Rose pulled into the parking lot between the victim's house and the laundromat, left the engine running, got out, grabbed Debbie, and then drove north. Perhaps he immediately headed to the clay quarry, which was located in that direction. It's worth mentioning that Rose didn't have any other criminal record. Either he didn't commit anything serious besides Debbie's murder, or he simply didn't get caught at the time. When the case was solved, the only living close relative of the victim was her older brother, Melvin. He attended the press conference where they announced the discovery of the culprit and thanked everyone who had worked on his sister's case for over half a century. He also said he wished his mom could have lived to see this moment, but added that she was now in heaven with Debbie. Every relationship of a person is based on the pillar of trust, whether it's between parents and children, husband and wife, or even between boyfriend and girlfriend. But if someone breaks the trust of another person in these essential relationships and starts thinking badly about them, it feels really terrible. And today's case is somewhat similar, where a boy and a girl from Pakistan were very happy in their relationship. But then, after some time, the girl breaks up because she started seeing a dark side of her boyfriend. But then, what the boy did with his girlfriend shook the entire Pakistan. Shaukat Ali Muqaddam was not only a normal citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador of Pakistan. Due to this, he had to live in different countries. However, in 2021, he was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. Apart from this, at one point, Shaukat Ali had also been Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan. Because of this, he held a very high position in Pakistan. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shaukat Muqaddam, his wife Kausar Muqaddam, 2 daughters and 1 son. October 23, 1993, was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shaukat Ali's house, whom they named Noor. Noor was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shaukat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, he spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Noor had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Shaukat Muqaddam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Noor started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan, but Noor thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, after the US, Noor returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Noor was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Noor and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Noor loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Noor belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Noor was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent, and confident girl. Along with all these things, Noor also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Shaukat Muqaddam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Noor met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Noor are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zakir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the Jaffer family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses, including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO, while his father, Zakir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed, and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself was an introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Noor, and he likes her, and Noor also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties, but friendship between Noor and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love, and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Noor were dating. Both families were happy because Noor completes Zahir and Zahir completes Noor. Actually, Noor brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Noor, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people, and at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Noor, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves, and their families were also very happy. But then, after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Noor. Actually, Noor later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Noor several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, when Noor couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship. Because neither of them was a normal family, and in such affluent households, it's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Noor left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Before moving forward, quickly subscribe to the channel. This is strange. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Quickly subscribe to it. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Noor just once, so he called Noor on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Noor was at her home, preparing for Eid with her family. Now, Zahir called Noor and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again, but I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Noor, "Come to my house, we'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Noor to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Noor leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Noor arrives outside Zahir's house, at the sent location in Sector F74, but strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, what would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen? Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time Noor was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jathar's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes." However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is cancelled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now, after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now, the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes, and then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Noor was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Noor during the car ride, but Noor wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffar's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Noor got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Noor wasn't supposed to go back inside the house with Zahir, but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then, on July 19th, Noor stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Noor had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m., but now it had been more than 24 hours, and Noor's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours, at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Shaukat Muqaddam texts his daughter, asking her where she is. However, Noor doesn't reply to that text message. Then, at 5:48 a.m., Noor's mother messages her, and 2 family friends also call Noor, yet there is no response from Noor. This causes worry for Noor's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Noor sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Noor's mother, Kausar Muqaddam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Noor's mother from his own phone and tells her that Noor is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Noor. Then, from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father, Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Noor is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Noor is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Noor and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Noor falls down, but Zahir drags her inside, Now, I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Noor inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener. But none of them helped Noor. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Noor attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Noor was always caught. But this time, because of Noor's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Noor back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes. Because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Noor with his handgun, but as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Noor. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Noor's body. Meanwhile, Noor scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails, but after some time, Noor's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Noor was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabs Noor by the throat and keeps squeezing until Noor's last breath is gone. Later, Noor's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen, but before killing Noor, Zahir rooked her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Noor's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Noor's throat, and finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Noor, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends, saying, "Thieves have broken into our house, and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked, named Therapy Works, and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Noor's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zahur, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and, with his employees, entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife, piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back, and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Noor's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now, everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir, and after seeing Noor's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert, because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there, and then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Shaukat Muqaddam to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Muqaddam's family home was engulfed in mourning because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Noor's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir according to Pakistan law, meaning the death penalty. After that, the police arrested Zahir, but now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Noor, and he had done so because he loved Noor very much. He had even proposed marriage to Noor, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Noor's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Noor agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Noor didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July 18th to 20th, Zahir tried to convince Noor for marriage, but when Noor refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Noor, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police, because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable, and because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Noor. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced, and secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaves strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Noor, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Noor. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Noor received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties, one for physically assaulting Noor and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Mohammed Jan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Noor, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Noor Muqadda murder case comes to an end right here. If you appreciate our efforts, like and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Thank you.